People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camila Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious.
mental?
Put in your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, you're watching GB News Live with Martin Daubney and me, Ellie Costello. Coming up for you this Wednesday lunchtime.
Diplomacy at last. Qatar has mediated an agreement between Egypt, Israel and Hamas to allow the movement of foreign passport holders out of Gaza. And as calls continue for a ceasefire, we'll be joined by Lord Daniel Finkelstein, who's argued those calling for one of a ceasefire simply fail to understand Israel.
The highly anticipated AI Safety Summit commences at Bletchley Park today. Tech leaders and spy chiefs will join the likes of Elon Musk and Kamala Harris as the UK hosts an event expected to highlight the opportunities and the dangers of artificial intelligence. We'll be live in Milton Keynes.
And batten down the hatches because Storm Kieran is coming with a danger to life issued for parts of the UK. We'll be live across the country as gusts of wind are expected to reach a whopping 80 miles an hour.
And we'll have the latest for you on a third McMouse attack as pro-Palestine protesters unleash rodents painted in red, white and green into yet another fast food chain in Birmingham. I think it's the third restaurant that's been attacked in 2 days. Dozens of rodents just released out onto the restaurant floor.
That's
horrible.
That's making you almost jump onto your stool, isn't it?
Oh, it's awful, yeah. I'd avoid McDonald's if I knew that was coming to a McDonald's near me anytime soon.
And it might come to a McDonald's near you soon. But first, here's your news headlines with Rhiannon.
Good afternoon, it's 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Rafah crossing from Gaza has opened to allow foreign nationals and some injured civilians into Egypt. The first group has now crossed the border and the wounded are receiving treatment at a nearby field hospital. Up to 500 foreign passport holders are also expected to cross into Egypt. Meanwhile, aid trucks have entered into Gaza, with Foreign Secretary James Cleverly warning they're vital to easing the humanitarian crisis there. It comes as the Israeli military says 9 of its soldiers have been killed during its ground offensive into Gaza. Explosions have been heard this morning as Israel's bombardment continues. The Israel Defense Forces says it's hit 11,000 Hamas targets so far. The IDF also claims an airstrike yesterday killed a senior Hamas commander it says was a ringleader of the attack on the 7th of October. Palestinian officials say 50 Gazans were killed and another 150 injured in that strike. Campaigners back here in London have projected the words "ceasefire now" onto the Houses of Parliament in the colours of the Palestinian flag. It was organised by Save the Children and other charities that say Rishi Sunak must put lives above politics and back calls for a ceasefire. They're handing a petition with over 300,000 signatures over to the government. In other news, senior politicians and technology bosses are at the world's first summit on AI safety at Bletchley Park. US Vice President Kamala Harris, Elon Musk and companies including Google, Meta and Microsoft are assessing the risks of AI. The Prime Minister hopes to put the UK at the centre of global efforts to monitor the technology, as well as attracting business investment. Technology Secretary Michelle Donnellan says a declaration on AI safety has been agreed by attendees of the summit.
It commits us to deepening our understanding of the emerging risks of frontier AI. It affirms the need to address these risks as the only way to safely unlock these extraordinary opportunities. And it emphasises the critical importance of nation-states, developers and civil society in working together on our shared mission to deliver AI safety.
A former top civil servant is answering questions at the COVID inquiry. Helen McNamara was Deputy Cabinet Secretary in 2020 and 2021 and played a key role in Britain's COVID response. She told the inquiry that Boris Johnson displayed a breezy confidence regarding the pandemic, which she found jarring. She's also criticised her former colleagues at the Cabinet Office, saying it had been very difficult to obtain basic details ahead of her appearance at the inquiry. Doctors are urging people to get their COVID and flu jabs after it was revealed millions of those who are eligible haven't yet taken up the offer. Cases of flu and COVID are expected to rise significantly during the colder months. A new campaign called Get Winter Strong aims to encourage people to get the jab, even if they don't typically come forward. Doctors say it's one of the most important things any of us can do to protect ourselves from serious illness. House prices increased by 0.9% in October, which experts say reflects the limited supply of properties on the market. Nationwide's market index showed an increase on last month's figures, though average prices across the UK are down 3.3% compared to last year. The Building Society says market activity remains weak, with the number of mortgages approved in September down 30%. Hundreds of schools in Scotland are closed today as support staff walk out in a dispute over pay. Janitors, cleaners and pupil support assistants are among those striking. It's part of a rolling action by Unison members after they rejected an earlier pay offer. More walkouts are expected next week. Amber weather warnings are in place for the south coast of England and parts of Pembrokeshire and Wales as Storm Ciarán approaches the UK. The Met Office says wind and rain could bring potential risk to life and property. Parts of Northern Ireland have already been flooded due to heavy rainfall and people have been warned not to travel. It comes less than 2 weeks after Storm Babette caused widespread damage across the UK. And the King and Queen are in Kenya on day 2 of their state visit. Their Majesties are celebrating animal welfare and environmental conservation with a tour of an elephant orphanage on the Queen's agenda. The King will also visit an urban forest to highlight the importance of green spaces in cities. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Ellie and Martin.
And thanks for that, Rhiannon. OK, welcome to GB News Live. Now, Boris Johnson's Downing Street displayed an unbelievably bullish and dismissive approach to coronavirus. Early in the pandemic, a former civil servant has said.
Yes, Helen McNamara, who served as Deputy Cabinet Secretary during the pandemic, said they were laughing at the Italians as the then Prime Minister expressed a breezy confidence.
She told the COVID-19 inquiry early today that her injections of caution in January and February of 2020 did not register with Boris Johnson.
Well, Pip Thompson, GB News presenter, joins us now. And Pip, good afternoon to you. All eyes right now on Helen McNamara.
Yeah, she was the second most senior civil servant, and we heard her mentioned yesterday by Dominic Cummings during his 4 hours of evidence because he was accused of being misogynistic towards her. So it's been very interesting to hear what she's been saying so far. She hasn't covered that topic, but she has highlighted what appears to be such a lack of preparation. Boris Johnson, former Prime Minister, believing that the UK would sail through it, a frustration that Boris Johnson didn't understand the science and that the government was blindly following the scientists' advice, which Helen McNamara said following the science mantra was a cop-out because it allowed ministers to avoid decisions and put unfair pressure on scientists. And one particular thing that, well, so far I've found a highlight is the warning that she gave 10 days before lockdown, March 2020, where she actually said in a meeting, I think this country is heading for disaster. I think we are going to kill thousands of people. And she told the inquiry that that was a horrible moment. There was also the challenge of working out what to do when Boris Johnson fell ill. Do you remember he had COVID, he was hospitalised with it. They had to have a plan as to what should happen if the Prime Minister was incapacitated. She said working that out felt like working in a dystopian nightmare. The overriding thing that she keeps saying, though, so far is about this lack of planning and preparation and almost an overconfidence in what they were planning to do. And they thought they could get through it.
And this inquiry at the moment, Pip, it feels a bit like a piñata of Boris, where everybody's queuing up to have a whack. Boris will face the inquiry in December. Yesterday, Dominic Cummings called everything a dumpster fire. He called Cobra hopeless, people running out and briefing the press without any control, even unable to get basic technological data displayed to the Prime Minister in those Cobra meetings. It sounded like a combination of headless chickens, rats in a sack, and they're all swearing like squaddies.
Were you surprised, though,
No.
Martin, that Dominic Cummings said all that?
Not remotely. No.
He's got scores to settle, hasn't he? And he painted a picture yesterday of dysfunction and chaos, dithering and indecision. Now, many people might agree with him, but others will say, hang on a minute, you know, this is your revenge. And Boris Johnson will be speaking, like you say, before the end of the year. One of the things Dominic Cummings said yesterday was referring to Boris Johnson as a trolley, because he kept changing his mind. He was so inconsistent, veering from one decision to another. But it's a long inquiry. There is a long way to go. But certainly what Helen McNamara has said today is, again, highlighting this lack of preparation, lack of planning and an overconfidence.
And Pip, you'll be across this for us throughout the afternoon, and hopefully we hear a bit more from Helen McNamara about the culture at Downing Street, and as you mentioned earlier, allegations of misogyny as well. It's going to be very, very interesting to be across. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pip. Moving on, the Foreign Secretary says British nationals trapped in Gaza could start to leave the besieged strip within days. James Cleverly said that Rafah crossing would likely open for a first group of foreign nationals today, with UK teams ready to help Britons as soon as they're able to go.
Well, meanwhile, Hamas says 7 civilian hostages have been killed in Israeli strikes on a refugee camp, including 3 foreign passport holders.
Well, GB News' security editor Mark White joins us now live from Tel Aviv. So, Mark, some hope at last that foreign nationals, including some Britons, may be allowed out of Gaza and into Egypt.
A rare piece of good news, and it is happening in a controlled and limited way, with, we're told, that about 500 or so foreign or dual nationals being allowed out off the Rafah crossing and into Egypt today. Now, what we're told is that a number of ambulances have come in. There was a queue of ambulances at the Rafah crossing that crossed over. In the conflict, some of those ambulances have now returned back across the Rafah crossing and are in Egypt, where these people can get some proper medical attention. In addition to the ambulances will be those civilian foreign nationals going across as well. No indications that any have crossed as yet. They've been queuing. There are passport officials on that crossing as we speak, and they are being assisted by border agents from a number of different countries. Now, the nationals who are crossing today, we understand, are from a number of nations, including Austria, Indonesia, Australia, and others. Now, there are some reports of a couple of British nationals, NGO workers, whose names are on the list, but no confirmation of that. It's one of the reports that's coming out. But the Foreign Office and other nations have been in intense negotiations over recent days with the Israelis and the Egyptians to try to secure the opening of the Rafah crossing, albeit in a limited way, to allow these foreign nationals out. There are obviously concerns that the Israelis and the Egyptians have. The Israelis don't want to see, for instance, Hamas terrorists going back across that border. That was an issue they had with aid going in. They don't want to see aid falling into the hands of Hamas terrorists as well. The Egyptians don't want a mass exodus over the border. There will be a limited exodus of a small number of people initially that will be treated in the hospitals in Egypt, and of course those foreign nationals, as I say, in a controlled way, but it will amount to thousands over a period of time.
OK, Mark White for us in Tel Aviv. As you say, some very rare good news amongst all this despair. Thank you very much indeed.
OK, and to expand on this story, we're delighted to be joined now by Lord Daniel Finkelstein, the columnist and author, who's written a column in today's Times. Good afternoon to you, Lord Finkelstein. Thank you for joining us. Written a column in today's Times called Ceasefire Supporters Fail to Understand Israel. This is coming off the back, of course, of calls from Sadiq Khan, and now 350 Labour councillors have written to Keir Starmer demanding the same. Can you explain to us, please, Lord Finkelstein, why these people simply fail to understand Israel?
Well, I've written a column about the film Exodus, which was a book that came out in 1958 originally, led to a film in 1960 by Otto Preminger, which starred Paul Newman. And it's a romantic vision of the foundation of the State of Israel. And of course, you could look at it and think, well, this is a bit hackneyed, it doesn't include all the nuances. But it helps explain how Israel looks at itself and also how Americans look at Israel. It's a vision, I suppose, of Israel's foundation and why it sees itself as a last refuge for Jews. That there had been violence for centuries against Jews, and now Jews were going to protect themselves. And so those people who are calling for ceasefires don't appear to me to comprehend that Israel is simply not going to live next door to a terrorist state that threatens its civilians. It would go against the essence of what the state of Israel is. So it's not merely absurd for Sadiq Khan, who cannot even end knife crime on the tube, to be lecturing everyone about how to solve the problems of the Middle East. It's also pointless because Israel is simply not going to allow the growth of a terrorist body right next door to it.
And as you wrote in your column, security is the biggest thing for the state of Israel, and that is why a ceasefire cannot happen.
You know, before the Second World War, my grandfather was not a Zionist. He was one of Germany's leading anti-Zionists. He really believed that Jews could live in Germany, and what happened to his family, the death and destruction that was wrought upon it and the rest of the Jewish community, changed his mind, naturally enough, about whether or not a state was needed. Once you've decided that really the part of the solution to the problems that Jews have had of safety in the world over centuries is the state of their own, and you've also realised that's the only place to which millions of Jews really could go after the Second World War. Once you've determined on that, you aren't going to allow a state to exist next door that threatens that security. So, I mean, I watched Sadiq Khan speak and say he recognised Israel's right to defend itself, immediately before which he'd said there should be a ceasefire. And you wonder what planet that kind of statement comes from, really, because how can Israel defend itself and also have a ceasefire, leaving in place the structure of terrorism? And Keir Starmer was much more clear thinking about this. I think he's, you know, my translation of this is he took a reasonably strong stance to begin with. He then saw that there was quite a lot of opposition in the party. He was a bit shaken by it, but he's come back to his original view in a fairly bold way, and I was quite impressed.
You write very movingly in your family memoir, your own mother was rescued from the hell of Belsen and found safe haven in Hendon in London. Lord Finkelstein, when you see today a 650% increase in anti-Semitic crimes in London, when you see Jewish schools have paint thrown on their doors, when you see Jewish children too afraid to even wear their blazers to go to school, how does that make you feel?
Well, it's frightening and worrying, and I write right at the beginning of my book, Hitler, Stalin, Mum and Dad, my story of what my parents suffered in the Second World War from both Hitler and from the far left, from Stalin. I write about my concern that this could happen again, and it's one of the motivations for writing the book. But when my grandfather Alfred Wiener was one of the first people to warn about the rise of the Nazis, he first started warning about this in 1919, so well before anyone else had really begun to do that. And you can see in that some of the seeds of some of the things that we're seeing, this kind of growth of conspiracy theory thinking and the growth of populism and the dangers to Jews of those moves. But the other thing that you get is a sense of proportion. You know, my very strong feeling is we live in one of the best countries in the world for someone to live as a refugee family, and that's what we are. And we love this country for the peace and tolerance and stability we have. And we want to protect its special qualities.
And do you still stand by that? Do you still think that this is one of the safest places for refugee families? Do you feel as though it is peaceful for those who are seeking refuge? Is that how you felt in recent weeks when you've seen the pro-Palestine marches?
Well, no, I am shaken by those, and I'm shaken by actually, you know, my reaction to, for instance, the takeover of Liverpool Street Station yesterday by these groups was two things. The one thing is I was worried about it as a Jew. I don't think that it would be safe for me to go to Liverpool Street Station in the middle of that demonstration, which is very concerning. It's one of the first times I felt that in this country. But the other thing that I felt was furious on behalf of most ordinary commuters who don't have a strong politics like I do, who don't, you know, spend their life writing columns in the Times, and who were interrupted in their journey home by self-aggrandizing people expressing their political opinion and asking the commuter going to Cambridge to call a ceasefire in the Middle East. And you just sort of think, well, they're not really going to be able to do that before they go home. So I did find that extraordinary, and I do think it's amazing that we now have these rolling demonstrations of a vast kind without any thought about the inconvenience it puts anybody else to. So of course people have the right to free expression of their political views, and political demonstrations are very important. They are, however, only one right. The right to go home after you've been to work is also a right. that also deserves respect. And there's a tension between these rights. And I was a bit surprised that we allowed the station to be taken over by people, involved in a conflict most people have no stake in at all, quite apart from the fact that, for me, it was certainly quite frightening to see. And, imagine this, you can imagine that for me, or particularly maybe for some people who, for instance, might wear a skull cap, which I don't do, and who are therefore more visibly Jewish than I might look, they might find that a very disconcerting thing. So to be fair, there weren't reports of violence, but then again, to be fair, probably nobody who was at risk went anywhere near the area.
And Lord Finkelstein, in your column today, you also reference a scene in Exodus where the hero Paul Newman celebrates the idea that Jews and Arabs will one day live in peace side by side. After the events of October the 7th and what's followed subsequently, do you hope or think that that's still possible?
Well, Paul Newman delivers that speech over an open grave of an Arab and a Jewish girl, an Arab man and a Jewish girl who've both been murdered in the very earliest days of the conflict. What a tragedy this is. And from the beginning, there has been the possibility of Jews and Arabs, Palestinian Arabs, living side by side, both having a state. Israel has repeatedly offered that to various incarnations of Palestinian leadership. It's not possible to offer it to Hamas because that would be like offering it to ISIS. It's not possible to do that. So Hamas and their infrastructure does have to be fought. But I think it's possible to have peace. My grandfather was a considerable scholar of Islamic literature. And he thought this wonderful civilization was something that Jews would benefit greatly from living alongside. And I feel the same. I think this fight is an absolute tragedy. But the only way that it can be brought to an end is for both sides. And in particular, this is a call upon all those people who say, Palestine from the river to the sea, something that you can also hear an echo of in extreme fundamentalist Zionist circles too. This is just not a route to peace. The land has to be shared. Everyone has to be able to live in peace alongside each other. But let's not be wishy-washy in our thinking. Before that can happen, the Israel is going to now have to deal with Hamas and is going to have to destroy its infrastructure, its tunnel system and its leadership, because there's no peace for anybody, Palestinian or Jew, until that happens. And the people who are camping out in the stations and having these big demonstrations, they always know what Israel should not do, what it's a disaster for Israel to do. They never say, what should Israel do about the fact that this invasive force came into its country, killed 1,500 people in most grotesque way, civilians in most grotesque way. And they say, as Sadiq Khan did, Israel has the right to defend itself, but never say how. And they feel that they leave to people like me the moral responsibility for how, and simply object to those methods. Well, that's just, it's very lame thinking, to be honest.
Lord Finkelstein, just before we let you go, I wanted to ask you about more expected protests this weekend, pro-Palestine marches in various cities, a large one expected in London. We've heard Suella Braverman talking about them this week, describing them as hate marches, but Sir Mark Rowley of the Metropolitan Police says words like jihad and the chant that you just said on air there, certain chants such as that, he says he can't police good taste that isn't within their scope. How do you react to that? How would you like to see this be policed?
Well, actually, look, I think all three of us would be strong advocates of free speech, even when it disturbs us. So when I review any demonstration or any statement, I prefer it when the police err on the side of thinking something is a matter of political taste and judgment rather than a matter of law. But I have to say, if someone threatens jihad, it is ridiculous to regard that as not a violent threat. It's meant to be, and it is. The question of whether or not people should say Palestine from the river to the sea is a different matter. But I do think there's a question of proportion here, and whether or not we ought to, that it's reasonable that people hold these vast, very partisan, and to Jews, whether rightly or wrongly, quite threatening demonstrations, whether it's right to feel threatened or not, can be held week after week in the central London, making central London effectively a no-go zone for Jewish people. That is, I am a bit worried about that. And I think it's right to ask that question. And there's a balance to be struck between people's rights to protest and the right of other people in the light of their protests taking over large parts of the city.
OK, Lord Daniel Finkelstein, thank you very much for joining us today on GB News and sharing your thoughts with us.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Yes, I could talk to him all afternoon. I'm sure you could as well.
Just fascinating insight. And you know, if you want to know what's going on, you know, ask him. And so fascinating his reactions to all the politicians and the activists and the charities calling for a ceasefire. And as Lord Finkelstein said, completely ignoring Israel's right to defend itself.
Well, let us know what you make of Lord Finkelstein's comments there in that interview. GBnews at gbnews.com.
OK, moving on. It's day 2 of a High Court hearing into government plans to house asylum seekers at former military airfields.
Yes, West Lindsey District Council argues the decision to use land at RAF Scampton, where the dam busters were based during World War II, is unlawful.
Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis is at Scampton live now. Hello to you, Will. So what's the latest there down on the ground?
Yeah, good afternoon. Well, we've been hearing today, particularly from the Home Office. It won't be until the end of this second day that we really hear from journalists that are actually inside of those courtrooms what's been said and what the discussions are. We won't even know if this judicial review will be successful for West Lindsey District Council and Braintree District Council, which of course is representing Wethersfield, for at least 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. But what we are hearing every single day is the concern about what would happen if RAF Scampton is turned into an asylum centre, particularly from men and women, but particularly the women here in Scampton. And I'm joined by Rachel Green, as well as Mandy, Rebecca and Sue, who are part of the Actual Action Group, which is mainly fighting for women's issues around the use of Scampton to house asylum seekers. Rachel, we've been speaking to you a little bit on GB News before, but just remind us, what is it that you and some of the other women here are concerned about if RAF Scampton is used for housing asylum seekers?
It's security and safety for the women and children on the camp, and the Home Office just aren't addressing that at all. All the security and safety is aimed at the other side of the fence and nothing for us.
You say that the Home Office aren't addressing it. What is it that you're telling the Home Office? What are the concerns specifically that you've been raising with them?
And the fact that it's an open facility and there's nothing here. So where are these migrants going to go? They can't all be bussed out every day if it's 2,000. So what are they going to do all day? Are they going to come onto our estate and cause issues for us? But no one seems to want to mitigate it.
One of the things that the Home Office have said that they are going to do is have a lot of security around RAF Scampton, even if it is, like you say, an open facility. They're also offering additional support to Lincolnshire Police, which is, of course, the police force that represents locally. Does that not quell any of your fears or the fears of some of the people here in Scampton Camp, which is the former married living quarters, right on the edge of the fence of Scampton?
No, not really, because our police force have been underfunded for years, and as far as anyone's telling us, they're not actually recruiting more officers, they're just redeploying officers. So our gain is someone else's loss.
You've talked a little bit about safety for women. What about for the other thing that you said, safety for children?
It's abominable to think that it's a good idea to place this alongside a school. The accommodation blocks are 18 metres from the primary school, the reception children's playground. The accommodation blocks that overlook the school and its playing fields. We were promised 8-foot security fencing with razor wire and wooden screening for the children, which we thought they'd be able to decorate and make it feel a bit less threatening. And now what we've ended up with is temporary Harris fencing with green tarpaulins, and it's distressing to think that they would treat our children with such disrespect.
Why does that matter to you? Do you have children at the local school?
I have 2 grandsons, 6 and 9.
And then as somebody How does that feel to you, knowing that your concerns aren't being listened to about this?
Well, it's a child protection issue, isn't it? I mean, teachers at the school aren't even allowed to hug children these days because of child protection. Who in their right mind would think, oh, I know, we'll put 2,000 single, unknown males right alongside about 100 4 to 11-year-olds?
I think the Home Office, again, would argue that they're going to have security in place and that they'd probably be speaking to the school. We haven't heard from the Home Office on this point, and we haven't spoken to the school specifically, so I can't comment. But I imagine that's what the Home Office would say. Day 2 of the judicial review, what's the ideal situation and how are you feeling knowing that in 4 weeks this could either happen or RAF Scampton could be, in your words, I imagine, saved?
I want to be optimistic, but the Home Office have been breaking the law for the last month or so, going against the stop work notice.
Which is a notice that West Lindsey District Council put in place to stop work, a legal enforcement notice.
Yeah, but they've carried on work, and it just worries me that even if the judicial review were to go ahead, to go our way, that they'd carry on anyway. They seem to have invested so much in the camp that they're sort of like committed now.
You think they're committed now? I know that you and everybody else is committed as well. You've been protesting for at least 7 months. And it is a long fight, I'm sure, because we won't know what's going to happen for at least 4 weeks. But by the end of the day, we'll know what's been said at the High Court.
OK, Will Hollis live from Scampton. Thank you very much for listening to the perfectly legitimate concerns of locals.
And as Will was just saying there, day 2 of the judicial review at the High Court. We'll be going live there after your news bulletin with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Ellie. It's 12:33, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Rafah crossing from Gaza has opened to allow foreign nationals and some injured civilians into Egypt. The first group has now crossed the border and the wounded are receiving treatment at a nearby field hospital. Up to 500 foreign passport holders are also expected to cross into Egypt. Local media says the first group has now arrived. James Cleverly says UK teams are ready to assist any British nationals as soon as they can leave. Meanwhile, aid trucks have entered into Gaza, with Foreign Secretary James Cleverly warning they are vital to easing the humanitarian crisis there. Senior politicians and technology bosses are at the world's first summit on AI safety at Bletchley Park. US Vice President Kamala Harris, Elon Musk and companies including Google, Meta and Microsoft are assessing the risks of AI. A declaration has been agreed by the summit attendees, the starting point for a global conversation on artificial intelligence safety. In a pre-recorded message, King Charles told the summit that the world must confront the risks with a sense of urgency.
AI holds the potential to completely transform life as we know it, to help us better treat and perhaps even cure conditions like cancer, heart disease, and Alzheimer's, to hasten our journey towards net zero. However, if we are to realize the untold benefits of AI, then we must work together on combating its significant risks too.
And a former top civil servant answering questions at the COVID inquiry. Helen McNamara was Deputy Cabinet Secretary in 2020 and 2021 and played a key role in Britain's COVID response. She told the inquiry a short time ago that Boris Johnson displayed a breezy confidence regarding the pandemic, which she found jarring. She's also criticised her former colleagues at the Cabinet Office, saying it had been very difficult to obtain basic details ahead of her appearance at the inquiry. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back over to Martin and Eddie.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Welcome back to GB News Live with myself and Martin. Now let's return to the second day of the High Court ruling to decide whether asylum seekers should be housed at military bases. Joining us live from the High Court is GB News' Ray Addison. It's pretty remarkable, isn't it, Ray? We've got local councils and the Home Office battling it out at the High Court.
Absolutely, Ellie. Martin, good afternoon. They're also taking on the Department for Levelling Up as well. Of course, yesterday it was the turn of the cases for those two councils to give their evidence. Of course, they're arguing that the Home Office doesn't have actually the necessary planning permission to house migrants on those two disused military bases. We're talking here about West Lindsey District Council fighting those Home Office plans to house 2,000 migrants at RAF Scampton, that's in Lincolnshire, and Braintree District Council fighting plans to house 1,700 asylum seekers at Wethersfield Airfield in Essex. The councils are questioning the Home Office's use of this Class Q law, which is used in the case of emergencies or to prevent emergencies. Cases for those councils saying this isn't an emergency situation, it doesn't justify the use of Class Q. They're also arguing towards the end of yesterday's session that there have been indications and evidence to suggest that the Home Office actually intends to use these sites for far longer than the initial 12 months, which they initially stated, potentially up as far as 3 or even 5 years. Well, today it was the turn of cases for the government to give their response to that. They say the Home Office has been very clear. The plan, the initial plan, has always been for 12-month usage, and in fact, Class Q only applies for 12 months, and therefore it shouldn't go any longer than that. They also say Class Q carries a requirement to return the site back to its previous condition after that 12-month period is over. They say the work that's going on at those two sites is temporary. They're using modular units, and everything will be removed after that time. And they say that any continuing use would actually depend upon the current situation. The Secretary of State has, they admitted, received advice about the potential for using the site for longer, perhaps up to 5 years, and they've also carried out checks on the value for money that would offer. However, no decision has been made, and decisions will only be made when those sites are actually up and running. Now, they're saying, and this is key, that that decision will depend on the situation with the small boats, the number of migrants who are coming across the channel, and also on hotel availability as well. The KCs say that the councils are bringing this case to the High Court based upon a situation they've kind of determined for themselves. The councils think it's likely that they're going to extend for 12 months, and that's why they're bringing that challenge. But they argue that there is no intent to do it for longer than 12 months at this stage. As Will was saying to you earlier on, we won't get a decision today. We're going to have to wait several weeks.
OK, Ray Addison live at the High Court. Thanks for that update.
Now, after the break, we'll be live at Bletchley Park for the AI Summit as Elon Musk warns it could pose an existential threat if it becomes anti-human. See you shortly.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like? I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to GB News Live with myself and Martin. Now, we've just been talking about AI. Is now the time that global leaders will finally get a grip on it?
Well, Elon Musk says AI could pose existential risk if it becomes anti-human. Tech experts, chief spies and global leaders are attending the UK's AI Safety Summit starting today at Bletchley Park in Milton Keynes.
Well, governments across the world have scrambled to address the risks posed by the fast-evolving technology, with US Vice President Camila Harris, Elon Musk and other companies including Google, Meta and Microsoft all in attendance. Rishi Sunak is hoping to put the UK at the centre of global efforts to monitor the technology, as well as attracting new business investment.
Well, let's bring our Deputy Political Editor Tom Harwood now, who's there at Bletchley Park. And Tom, it's fair to say this kind of stuff gets you very excited, doesn't it? So come on, excite us. What can we expect from this AI Global Summit?
Well, we've already had a number of announcements, and it's only barely been a few hours since the starting photograph, the sort of family photograph of all of these digital ministers from around the world got going. People were arriving at 9 o'clock, and within a couple of hours, the first big piece of news broke. And that is the Bletchley Declaration, signed by 28 countries here, most notably including the big players that the UK, the EU and China, all signing up to this declaration acknowledging the risks and the need to carefully develop this remarkable technology into the next crucial 6 and 12-month phases. Indeed, that's something else that has been agreed at the very start of this conference, that this conference is the start point, not the end point for the AI regulation journey for the world. The first conference that may well have some sort of global agreement framework agreed in a very loose sense of terms. In 6 months' time, it will be South Korea that is hosting a similar sort of way, looking at the next challenges. And then in a further 6 months, it will be France hosting the next summit. In many ways, this AI summit here is starting a chain of summits, much like we see with these annual climate summits that started back in the 1990s and early 2000s. This is the start of a chain of AI summits that will look at the existential dangers of AI in much the same way that the world looks at the existential dangers of a changing climate. And that is perhaps one of the things today. Not just that the Chinese Vice Minister for Technology has been here, has been speaking along the same lines as the United States, the EU and the UK, but also world, not just those countries, but also those companies have signed up to this journey where every 6 months people are going to convene and look at what can be done to make sure this remarkable new burgeoning technology remains safe.
OK, Tom Harwood for us at Bletchley Park, which is the equivalent of his Disney World. Enjoy the summit, Tom. Thank you very, very much for that update. He's very excited, isn't he?
Certainly is.
To be fair to him, it is a world first. And as he says, we want to be on the front foot of this, and we are going to see these annual summits now, and we are the world leaders. I think that is something to be quite proud of, really.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah.
Now, moving on to the weather, as large parts of Newry and County Down, Northern Ireland, have been swamped by floodwater as the city's canal burst its banks amid heavy rainfall.
Well, dozens of businesses were engulfed in the floods, with widespread damage caused to buildings, stock and furnishings, with local police forces warning people to stay out of the city centre as streets have turned to rivers.
Meanwhile, people are protecting their homes and businesses. Roads have been closed and ferries cancelled as England, as well as the Channel Islands, prepare itself for Storm Ciarán.
With the Met Office issuing yellow and amber warnings indicating potential risk to life and property. Well, let's speak now with GB News' Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. Good afternoon to you, Doogie. And what's the situation on the ground there?
Well, good afternoon indeed, and yes, welcome to Newry. Newry is a city that sits in a valley and it flows out to the sea at Warren Point, Rostrevor, and the Newry Canal, which is one of the oldest canals in Britain, meets the River Clanroy right here. And if you could just see behind us, there's been over 12,000 sandbags deployed into Northern Ireland's eastern province in anticipation of the rain that's coming tonight. You can just see how high the river is here, because the arches, you can't actually see them now. That's down about 4 feet than it was last night. And if you take a walk with me now, the damage that did when it came over the top of the that wall and crashed into the city centre, well, you can see just there behind us, the businesses here are still pretty much underwater. Now, those businesses, most of them haven't been able to return yet because high tide is due here in just about 20 minutes' time. And of course, because it's so close to the sea, that will cause problems for those businesses and additional flooding. But some of the flood defences here that were put in place many, many years ago have also had a problem. You can see just down in behind us here, that is an orange pumping station, and that was put into place in order to pump the water out of the Clanroy River that came over the banks and into the streets. And last night it too was flooded, and because it was absolutely drenched in water, it's sitting at a low point. Now, where I stand now is County Armagh, and just across this bridge, if you just swing over there, that bridge is County Down, and you can see that they have actually closed that bridge off because they're afraid of the structure of the bridge with the amount of water that is hitting. Now, there's still been floods further upriver in Portadown, Bambridge, and we're now here in Kilkeel and Newcastle, and that's because the land is so sodden that the water is washing off it and coming down in. So Newry, one half of the city is still operating very well, and the half of the city that is in round the canal and the Clanroy River is still in real problems, and tonight they're expecting more rain.
Doogie Beattie, thank you for that dramatic update from Northern Ireland. Fantastic stuff.
And good luck to those businesses as well. As Doogie says, the ground is already saturated. More rainfall coming their way. So Doogie will be across that for us on GB News.
And of course, the big news is, where will the storm hit next? We'll have that later in the programme. But moving on now, the King and Queen continue their 4-day state visit to Kenya today, which has been overshadowed by calls for an apology for abuses committed during British colonial rule. This is the King's first state visit to a Commonwealth country as monarch. King Charles said that he felt the greatest sorrow and deepest regret for atrocities suffered by Kenyans during their struggle for independence, but some are saying that this doesn't amount to a full apology.
Let's speak now with our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker. Good afternoon to you, Cameron. It's been an absolutely packed schedule, hasn't it? It's been a really positive trip, but it has been somewhat overshadowed by all of this, hasn't it?
It certainly has, and the King stopped short of a full apology last night at his speech at the State's banquet. He did express sorrow, one of the first royals, if not the first royal, to talk of the sorrow due to those atrocities committed during the Mau Mau uprising of the 1950s. Leaving some descendants of those people very disappointed that we didn't get a full apology. But from our understanding, the British government's stance is that a modern-day administration should not be liable for atrocities committed by governments 60-odd years ago. But you're right, they've had a very packed schedule today. The King, at a really lovely moment this morning, actually, meeting an 117-year-old World War II veteran, thought to be one of the oldest people on the planet. And he re-presented him, we can see it there on your screens, with his World War II medals, because he had to throw them away in the 1950s for fear that he would be associated with Britain. So it was a really lovely moment for this Corporal Sam Welly here at the Commonwealth War Graves in Nairobi. You see the Queen Camilla there accompanying the King on that engagement. The Queen also had a solo engagement at the Brook Donkey Sanctuary. She was dressed up. She was dressed up by some ladies there. She was given a gift called a shukka, which is a kind of cape, and she was dancing around with them. She looks a little bit uncomfortable, to be perfectly honest.
Very British,
she was a good sport. But earlier, I actually spoke to the chief executive of Brook, the charity, and he explained to me what it means having the Queen as president of the charity. So let's take a listen.
It comes through enormously, her love and passion for everything equine, and when I've talked to her, she's incredibly knowledgeable, both about the issues that we're trying to work on, but also about Brooke. She's very aware of our history, dating back to the 1930s in Egypt. And of course, her father fought in Egypt in the Second World War. So she's had a long knowledge and understanding, and we couldn't be prouder and more honoured to have her as our president.
And Cameron, we saw earlier on, King Charles, very tech-savvy, recorded a message of support and also issuing caution for how we should handle AI. Very impressive.
Yes, very impressive. Bit of a surprise that he popped up at Bletchley Park, even though he is in Kenya. We know that it's Rishi Sunak's kind of attempt to make Britain a world authority on artificial intelligence and the safety of it. Downing Street has denied that it's being snubbed, this summit's being snubbed by the US president as well as other world leaders. So I don't think it's hardly surprising that we've got the British government rolling out the King on, let's say, a bit of a royal star offensive, giving it a bit of that star power to the summit.
How do you feel as though the King and Queen are being received in Kenya? How do you feel as though this trip is going?
I think it's a bit of a mix, to be honest. You look at the pictures of them surrounded by Kenyans who clearly are really engaged with them and really want to meet them. And you have to remember the whole point of the state's visit, of course. The British government sends the King and Queen to these places. We know, he had a bit of a trip there, actually, because it's been such atrocious weather. For those listening on radio, we've just seen the King trip on a bit of artificial grass, which has been laid out so their shoes don't get muddy. But yes, they very much are being well received, I think, in Kenya. It's all about trade and strengthening relations between Britain and the African nation.
And it's funny because all eyes were on the King there, of course. It was a great recovery. He stubbed his toe. He did well. And
whipped out his sunglasses, didn't he? And just carried on walking.
Looking very cool in his Ray-Bans.
Very, very cool. And I hear as well, I saw something this morning that he's actually read a diary extract from his mother, which is a very emotional moment for him.
It was. I'd never heard this before, but he spoke of it during his speech last night at the State's banquet, where he had read a section of Queen Elizabeth II's diary from 1952, of course, very poignant for her it was, because it was where she became Queen at Treetop Safari Lodge in Kenya in 1952. And in it, she spoke that she didn't want to miss a moment of the magnificent Kenyan landscapes, and the King referred to that in his speech last night. So, yes, a full history Kenyan has with the British royal family.
Yeah, and how lovely and how poignant for him to read those diary extracts in the place where she wrote them. Lovely.
Exactly.
Cameron Walker, always very good to see you. Thank you very much.
And especially giving those medals out like that, I mean, especially this time of year with these poppies on our chest, that really makes my heart swell.
Yeah, lovely,
Really
isn't it? 117 years old.
Wonderful.
They do look like they're having a really wonderful trip in Kenya. We will have the latest on the situation in Israel and Gaza as the Rafah crossing opens for some foreign nationals. We'll have the latest with Mark White, so do stay with us.
Hi there, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. A day of blustery showers for many of us before it turns increasingly wet and windy as Storm Ciarán arrives overnight. Now, first, the more persistent wet weather is affecting central and northern parts of Scotland. That is edging northwards, followed by heavy downpours into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland, and also scattered showers and sunny spells further south. The best of any drier weather will be towards the southeast, although it's going to be blustery for many of us, and it's going to feel on the cool side. Now, overnight, we're going to see the approach of this area of low pressure named Storm Ciarán because of the risk of disruptive and in some places damaging winds around southern coastal areas in particular. Initially, it's the wet weather that could cause problems. Overnight, that sweeps into the south of the UK, and then the winds strengthen. Southwest England, most at risk of the strongest winds during the early hours of Thursday. In places, gusts of 80 or 85 miles an hour, but they will mostly be affecting the coast, and then that swathe of strong winds through the day on Thursday moves along the coastline to affect by the afternoon the southeast of England, with again coastal areas most at risk of some very strong winds, 70, 80 miles an hour, inland more like 50 or 60 miles an hour, and much lighter winds further north, although it will be a blustery day with heavy rain in places. Bye-bye.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good afternoon. You're watching and listening to GB News Live with Martin Dorby and Eddie Costello coming up this Wednesday lunchtime.
Diplomacy at last. The first group of foreign passport holders have been evacuated from the Gaza Strip and have reached Egypt by the Rafah border crossing, whilst the Israeli offensive intensifies. We'll have the latest from Mark White in Tel Aviv.
And the highly anticipated Artificial Intelligence Summit commences at Bletchley Park today, highlighting the opportunities and the dangers of AI, with Elon Musk warning it could pose existential risk if it becomes anti-human.
And batten down the hatches. Storm Kieran is coming with a danger to life issued for parts of the UK. We're live across the country as gusts of wind are expected to reach a whopping 80 miles an hour as the Met Office issues further warnings for other parts of the UK.
And if you're of a nervous disposition, look away now. A third McMouse attack as pro-Palestine protesters unleash rodents painted in red, white and green into yet another fast food chain restaurant in Birmingham.
That is literally my worst nightmare. It's enough to put you off McDonald's for life. You don't want that with your nuggets, do you? Honestly. The third McDonald's in 2 days. Our reporter Jack Carson will be live for us in Birmingham as the rodents run riot in McDonald's.
And apologies if that's put you off your lunch, but this won't, because here's your news headlines with Rihanna.
Thank you, Martin. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 1. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Rafah crossing from Gaza has opened to allow foreign nationals and some injured civilians into Egypt. The first group has now crossed the border and the wounded are receiving treatment at a nearby field hospital. Up to 500 foreign passport holders are also expected to cross into Egypt. Local media says the first group has now arrived. James Cleverly says UK teams are ready to assist any British nationals as soon as they can leave. Meanwhile, aid trucks have entered into Gaza, with Foreign Secretary James Cleverly warning they are vital to easing the humanitarian crisis there. And it all comes as the Israeli military says 9 of its soldiers have been killed during its ground offensive into Gaza. Israel's bombardment continues. The Israel Defense Forces says it's hit 11,000 Hamas targets so far. The IDF also claims an airstrike yesterday killed a senior Hamas commander it says was a ringleader of the attack on the 7th of October. Palestinian officials say 50 Gazans were killed and another 150 injured in that strike. Meanwhile, back here, campaigners in London have projected the words "ceasefire now" onto the Houses of Parliament in the colours of the Palestinian flag. It was organised by Save the Children and other charities that say Rishi Sunak must put lives above politics and back calls for a ceasefire. They're handing a petition with over 300,000 signatures over to the government. In other news, senior politicians and technology bosses are at the world's first summit on AI safety at Bletchley Park. US Vice President Camila Harris, Elon Musk and companies including Google, Meta and Microsoft are assessing the risks of AI. The Prime Minister hopes to put the UK at the centre of global efforts to monitor the technology, as well as attracting business investment. The declaration has been agreed by attendees of the summit as the starting point for a global conversation on AI safety. Tech entrepreneur Elon Musk says AI poses existential risks to humanity.
We're not stronger or faster than other creatures, but we are more intelligent. And here we are for the first time, really in human history, with something that's going to be far more intelligent than us. So it's not clear to me we can actually control such a thing, but I think we can aspire to guide it in a direction that's beneficial to humanity. But I do think it's one of the existential risks that we face, and it's potentially the most pressing one.
A former top civil servant has suggested that hundreds of her colleagues may have breached lockdown rules, including government ministers. Helen McNamara was Deputy Cabinet Secretary in 2020 and 2021 and played a key role in Britain's COVID response. She told the inquiry that rules were routinely broken in the daily course of government and that Boris Johnson displayed a breezy confidence regarding the pandemic, which she found jarring. She's also criticised her former colleagues at the Cabinet Office, saying it had been very difficult to obtain basic details ahead of her appearance at the inquiry. Doctors are urging people to get their COVID and flu jabs after it was revealed millions of those who are eligible haven't yet taken up the offer. Cases of flu and COVID are expected to rise significantly during the cold months. A new campaign called Get Winter Strong aims to encourage people to get the jab, even if they don't typically come forward. Doctors say it's one of the most important things any of us can do to protect ourselves from serious illness. House prices increased by 0.9% in October, which experts say reflects the limited supply of properties on the market. Nationwide's market index showed an increase on last month's figures, though average prices across the UK are down 3.3% compared to last year. The Building Society says market activity remains weak, with the number of mortgages approved in September down 30%. Amber weather warnings are in place for the south coast of England and parts of Pembrokeshire and Wales as Storm Ciarán approaches the UK. The Met Office says wind and rain could bring potential risk to life and property. Parts of Northern Ireland have already been flooded due to heavy rainfall and people have been warned not to travel. It comes less than 2 weeks after Storm Babette caused widespread damage across the UK. And the King and Queen are in Kenya on day 2 of their state visit. Their Majesties are celebrating animal welfare and environmental conservation with a tour of an elephant orphanage on the Queen's agenda. The King will also visit an urban forest to highlight the importance of green spaces in our cities. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car and digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Ellie and Martin.
Thanks, Rhiannon. You're watching GB News Live with myself and Martin now. Is now the time that global leaders will finally get a grip on AI? Well, Elon Musk says AI could pose existential risk if it becomes anti-human.
Tech experts, chief spies and global leaders are attending the UK's AI Safety Summit, which commenced today at Bletchley Park in Milton Keynes.
Well, Rishi Sunak is hoping to put the UK at the centre of global efforts to monitor the technology, as well as attracting new business investment.
Well, joining us now is broadcaster and futurist and all-round AI geek, has to be said, Andrew Eborn. Andrew, OK, this summit is of global significance. The UK putting itself at the centre of a new movement, but a lot of people's eyes glaze over when it comes to AI. So come on, get us excited.
Well, let's wake them up. I can tell you, this is the greatest human achievement, but also potentially our biggest existential threat. Right. All credit to Rishi, and this is something I've been predicting on this very stage for several months now. Ellie will tell you, ever since we first met, we've been talking about AI. What Rishi's saying is that we should be front and centre where we develop technology. Some of the best in the world, the best brains creatively and scientifically in the world belong right here in Great Britain. And what's happening, we're gathering the great and the good and the unwashed all together in Bletchley Park, which is the home of computing. You might remember Alan Turing, the guy who appears on the back of a £50 note. Yeah. He was the guy who cracked the Enigma code at Bletchley Park and invented perhaps the first computer to do that. So what's going to happen? We've got the great and the good. They've got to decide two things. One is, what are the risks? And secondly, what steps should be taken to deal with those. And Elon Musk, he's just come out, I've got a little press release here, he said, I don't know what necessarily the fair rules are, but you've got to start with insight before you do oversight. And I'm a Musketeer. I'm always supporting good old Elon Musk because he brings out the best in people. He's a real character. And it was wonderful to see him today when they did the opening speeches. And in those opening speeches, we had Michelle Donnelly, who was talking about how great it is to come to the UK. We had a little scanning over to see Elon Musk in the audience behaving himself, which is good. And we also had King Charles, who made his own comments about it, saying, look, he puts it on a par with the discovery of electricity or the splitting of the atom, he said, and also to realise, basically, there are untold benefits, but we must make sure that we harness the risks.
Now, there's been a lot of flack before it started. Joe Biden isn't coming, President Macron isn't coming, Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, isn't coming, Justin Trudeau, Japan. But we do have Kamala Harris turning up, and she's been a champion of AI in America. In fact, she's saying, hang on a minute, Britain, you're not taking a lead on this. America is the centre of AI. Can we expect a little bit of jousting on that topic?
You definitely can. I'll tell you what, the PAIN, the pain, is basically Biden. On the 30th of October, he issued an executive order on the safe, secure and trustworthy artificial intelligence. And he says, to ensure that America leads the way in seizing the promise and managing the risk. The fact is, AI knows no borders. And Rishi has wisely said, I want everybody to collaborate, because that's what we need to do. Invited China and various others to the table. And this, I can promise you, will probably be Rishi, if he gets it right, this will be his greatest legacy, that people talk about. Rishi was the guy who brought AI to the UK.
Well, that is something he would certainly like, wouldn't he? We know he loves California, we know he loves his tech. This is something he feels very, very passionate about. But he has always spoken about wanting to be the first, but also wanting to protect it from it getting into the wrong hands. And that is why, you touch on China there, that is why it is so controversial to some that China have been invited?
Well, I think you can't have a discussion unless it's a worldwide thing. It's no good saying, hang about, talk about climate, don't talk to China, and talk about India and so on and so forth. You've got all of these things. Everybody is involved. China's worried about it as well, is the reality. They understand the huge benefits. And every day we see seismic changes, both in terms of medicine, new diseases are being cured as a result of it. Creatively, you're having some of the most creative outputs out there. But at the same time, you need to balance it with rules and regulations.
Yeah, but also there are those who say, Liz Truss being one of them, that it's a bit like inviting the fox into the chicken pen. I mean, we're always being told that we're banning TikTok, even from parliamentary mobile phone devices, because the Chinese are spying on us. They're even spying on us through the cameras and the microphones in electric vehicles. They're spying on us via 5G mass. It is a bit of an eyebrow raiser to invite the Chinese. I think it has to be said.
The reality is, if you're having a debate about fox hunting, you'd want to invite the fox to get their opinion as well. So I think Liz Truss is right to a certain extent. Of course you are. But you're assuming that everybody's what they call bad actors. And both the Chinese and also others around the world want to use AI for good. It will make all sorts of tasks, which we suddenly thought were unimaginable, possible. And well, that's what I love. We can collaborate, work on that sort of basis. And so far, the feedback coming out of Bletchley Park is really, really positive.
There's one phrase that really leapt out there, and sounds a bit apocalyptic, sounds a bit dystopian. Elon Musk said this can be anti-human. What does he mean by that?
Of course it can, because you're going to basically 300 million jobs, according to Goldman Sachs, will be got rid of. Because what's going to happen is a lot of those things are going to be automated. The best way to look at AI, however, artificial intelligence, is as a co-pilot. If you turn around and say, look, we've got these things that are going to make our life a lot easier, in the same way as we talked about calculators last time I was here, very, very recently, and I'm glad we got the memo, by the way. It's got to be good. But we've got that sort of thing. It will make people work on that sort of basis. You have to get new skills. And if you think, 40-odd years ago, 60% of the jobs we have today weren't even thought about. So we're going to evolve on that sort of basis. People will get new skills. And what I'd love to see in education is, let's accept the fact that a lot of these things that AI is going to use to write first drafts of all sorts of things. Let's accept that, but maybe increase other skills, such as oracy. Let's get children to be tested, where they can actually explain what they've learned and so on and so forth. But it's a really, really powerful tool. What we need to do is to make sure it's regulated appropriately. And as you know, I'm a copyright lawyer, so dealing with intellectual property and how that's going to work in this space is very, very important.
There was a poll out this week, Andrew, that said that 1 in 3 Britons fear losing their jobs to AI. There is a genuine fear amongst people that this technology, rapidly developing, will take over.
And you're so right, Elliot, and they should be scared, because the current jobs that they have will be replaced. They'll be made, a lot of things will be automated. That's why I say 300 million jobs is what Goldman Sachs estimate will be lost to it. But people are going to evolve. The best way of basically doing the stuff is to prepare for it, understand what it does. And what we do on a regular basis here on this very channel is talk about AI and how you can embrace that. Get up to speed with what you can do with it, because that's going to be the new opportunities for the future.
OK, I think we can cut now. Do we have live pictures? The royal visit to Kenya. And we just heard earlier that the Queen loves all things equine. There she is now in Nairobi, Kenya, feeding animals.
Yeah, she's feeding the elephants there, meeting with those in this elephant sanctuary. She does look very excited. This is an absolute dream of mine to do this. As we were saying earlier, part of their 4-day state visit to Kenya. And Cameron Walker, our royal correspondent, joins us now. Cameron, this is just wonderful, isn't it? You can just tell that the Queen is absolutely in her element amongst the animals here.
She absolutely is. I mean, elephants are going to be enjoying a mud bath as Her Majesty the Queen is watching on. This is the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust and the Kenyan Wildlife Service, and it's all about conservation and the preservation of wildlife and protected areas across Kenya. Her Majesty, I'm told, is going to have the opportunity to bottle feed an orphan baby elephant as well. So very shortly, Her Majesty will be invited to do that. She's going to be hearing about the orphanage's work, because these are elephants which are orphans, baby elephants. As I said, she's going to be visiting a mud bath area, hear from the head keeper as well. The King is also expected to join Her Majesty at some point at the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust, which you are seeing live pictures on right now here on GB News from Kenya. Her Majesty's going to also visit the park's ivory burning site, which which is a historic location where 12 tons of ivory were burnt by the former Kenyan president in 1989. Most of it was intercepted before entering the market and stored, and it shows Kenya's commitment to conservation of elephants and an absolute zero tolerance to the ivory trade and poaching.
And actually, Cameron, that's something that I know King Charles has been talking about for a long time, you know, banning the international sale of ivory, which of course starts and begins with the slaughter of elephants and the preservation of them in this manner. It's wonderful to see. Kenya is a beautiful, beautiful country. I went on safari there many years ago now, and one of my big regrets is not taking a balloon trip up above the plains. Fantastically beautiful area, but look at those wonderful animals.
Oh, absolutely, and you've just got to go back to the history of the royal family and conservation work. The King's father, Prince Philip, with his presidency of WWF, and of course the King himself has been really keen on conservation for more than half a century now. His son, heavily involved in set up United for Wildlife as well. And these pictures here, it's all about educating Kenyans, I suppose, that they can really make a much better living preserving these animals and the conservation work for, as you said, Martin, things such as tourism, rather than poaching and the ivory trade.
And what has been so wonderful about this trip to Kenya is the King and Queen, within this schedule, are really highlighting things that they are passionate about. Yeah. They love to meet people and speak with people. We've seen a lot of that in the past few days. And they both have such a fondness for animals. And we can see that, can't we, within the planning of this trip?
Yeah, I mean, yesterday we saw the King visiting an organic urban farm, which was attached to a bit of wasteland, I suppose, of a hospital. It's been only been up and coming for the last year or so, but it's already growing crops. And we saw pictures of the King in his cool sunglasses pulling up crops and looking at baby chicks as well, which, of course, will be feed. The Queen was at a library. She was reading to young children, literacy, a huge passion of hers. Conservation and the environment, much more the King's thing. However, the Queen is heavily involved, as we saw with the Brook charity, with equine and animal conservation, and we are seeing Her Majesty here with baby orphaned elephants, and we are expecting her at some point to bottle feed a baby orphan.
And that'd be a wonderful image.
Been handed now.
Wonderful image. And, of course, they're orphaned because their parents have been slaughtered for their ivory. And now, the great thing about this is encouraging that conservation, tourism, going out there, a much more long-termist attitude to a precious resource. Elephants are a precious resource. If you kill them for their ivory, of course, they are gone. And these elephants have been orphaned because their parents have been taken for their ivory. So this is massively important work and beautiful pictures, Cameron.
Oh, absolutely. And it's all about strengthening relations between the two nations as well. And Kenya at the moment has a huge youth unemployment problem. And they are vulnerable, these young people, and the King is shining a spotlight, and the Queen as well, on issues or opportunities for young people in Kenya. So the King, for example, yesterday was at a young entrepreneurial tech hub, touring the different startups to do with tech and innovation and digital jobs for young people. Of course, the UK has an ageing population, as we spoke about yesterday, Martin, so perhaps that would fill the skills gap. It's, again, strengthening the relations between the United Kingdom and Kenya. But conservation, of course, a huge issue, and tourism could be and is already a huge booming market for Kenya and similar countries in Africa. And by having the Queen here, and hopefully the King at some point joining her, we are having the pictures of two of the most famous people on the planet at this particular wildlife orphanages, shining a light on the amazing work that these conservationists do.
And such an important cause to highlight, Cameron. Thank you so much for bringing these wonderful pictures to us. If you are just joining us on the radio, Queen Camilla is currently at an elephant sanctuary for orphaned baby elephants in Nairobi in Kenya. She has just given a little head scratch to that baby elephant down there by her feet, and we are expecting her to bottle feed an elephant shortly, so we will bring those pictures to you here on GB News Live.
Yeah, they'll be worth the wait, and I can see them now on the front page of tomorrow's newspapers. OK, coming up in just a moment, Free Palestine protesters have struck a third McDonald's in just 24 hours with a bizarre and vile live mouse stunt. We'll be discussing that next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you. Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months. That's the Camila Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train. Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Welcome back to GB News Live with Ellie and Martin. Now, Free Palestine protesters have struck a third McDonald's in just 24 hours with a bizarre live mouse stunt that involves unloading dozens of these rodents who've been spray-painted in the Palestine colours and then releasing them into McDonald's restaurants. Let's have a look.
My days. Look at this. They've just dropped these off in McDonald's, all these rats in McDonald's. Oh my days.
That is a lot of rats.
Look at that.
Somebody just took that in?
Yeah. Oh my days.
Come on, let's get out of here.
And apologies if that's made your stomach turn. It's put Ellie off her sushi. Almost. Now, just so you know, that's happening because, allegedly, McDonald's gave out over 100,000 meals in Israel, including to soldiers. Well, GB News reporter Jack Carson now joins us from Birmingham, as it were, at the scene of the crime. Jack, 3 strikes on McDonald's now. Are we any closer to finding out who's doing it and why?
Well, good afternoon to you both. Certainly, there is an investigation underway by the West Midlands Police. They say that this is a public nuisance offence. Of course, they were alerted to the incident a few days ago at the Star City McDonald's, which is just a little bit outside of the city centre. They were alerted to that, and of course, they're appealing to the public for information around the people, of course, involved in that protest. But since that initial attack, there have been two others. Yesterday in Perry Bar, again just outside the city centre, and now here last night in Small Heath. So this is a particularly worrying thing, of course, for not only for the police, who are of course trying to stop these before they really begin to spread across the country, but also of course for the people dining in these McDonald's as these protesters come in shouting phrases such as "Free Palestine," amongst other things like "Boycott Israel." And of course, having these boxes of mice, some of them painted in the colours of the Palestinian flag, some of them just in boxes, as they're then chucked on the floor as they then shout their messages, leaving staff and customers screaming. And of course, McDonald's did comment on that first incident initially in Star City. They did say that they had completely sanitised the restaurant, that it was concerning, and they apologised for any inconvenience caused to, of course, the staff and the customers. But the fact is that this only currently seems to be in Birmingham, and it hasn't yet spread around the country. But of course, that will be a worry for a lot of people. We know that the reason these are going ahead is because of McDonald's Israel's statement. Of course, as you said, Martin, they have been donating meals and giving meals to IDF soldiers. That has caused some controversy around the globe, with McDonald's franchises around the globe, particularly in Kuwait and Pakistan. Their McDonald's came out and said that they were not in the same position of support as what McDonald's Israel was, and they had in fact donated money towards other causes, other pro-Palestine causes, including humanitarian aid in Gaza as well. But of course, McDonald's said that in Israel said that they give 50% discount to all security and rescue forces that arrive independently amongst the branches. So that's why, amongst other chains as well, Starbucks and Disney are other big companies, other global companies that the pro-Palestine protesters are urging people to boycott, amongst other global chains around the country. But McDonald's is the only one so far that has seen protests of this scale.
And of course, Jack, as you say, concerns now that there could be copycat-style attacks in other McDonald's up and down the country. We saw Liverpool Street Station last night. A sit-in was held by pro-Palestinian protesters. There is this movement that is spreading across the country at the moment. And do you know who I feel sorry for in this, Jack, is not only the customers, who, of course, have mice running under their feet when they're trying to eat. It's minimum wage staff who, in that video that we were just sharing there, are trying to pick up these mice. I mean, it's not in their job description to do that. And then, of course, the mice as well. Do we know anything about the safety of these animals or what McDonald's does with them afterwards?
Well, we've not got the information as to, like you say, what happens to those mice. Certainly animal rights activists have come out and said how disgusted they are at the abuse of these animals and the abuse of the mice and the trauma that those mice, the animal rights campaigners say, are going through, having to go through this ordeal, of course, not only being spray painted, but also, of course, then chucked on the floor in what seems to be, in the videos, quite a violent manner as they then shout slogans such as "Free Palestine." Of course, for many of the staff in the Star City McDonald's, the situation seemed to be able to be brought under control quite quickly. That was less of the case here last night, where the mice seemed to spread out across the floor, of course, as they were then released from that box. So you're right, staff having to pick them up and wait for, I guess, the police to arrive and to organise how to go forward from there. Of course, then the restaurants have to go through a deep sanitary clean to make sure, before they let any more customers in, there's no possible risk of contamination of any food and, of course, any surfaces around the McDonald's as well.
OK, Jack Carson, thank you for the update. Well, I think it's a thank you. Not about you, but I'm kind of getting put off my lunch. But anyway,
yeah,
thanks
so am I. Thank you, Jack.
What do you make of this?
I think it's mad. Yeah. I don't really understand mice. Why involve mice?
I guess because they're going to repulse people. It's designed to repulse people and shock them and scare them and cause. I guess we're talking about it.
Yeah, I suppose. Maybe we're giving them what they want in that sense. But it is actually the staff I feel sorry for. It's in that video when you can see them trying to obviously lift the box and put the box on the ground with the lid on the floor, if that makes sense. So you have to flip the box over. And those staff members are having to do that. And I feel quite sorry for them. What do you think?
Well, and the mice.
And the mice,
you know, the mice are just getting lobbed in there. People are getting hacked off with it. It just goes to show you, everything is political these days, even a Big Mac.
Yeah.
OK, well, plenty more to come after your latest news headlines with Rhiannon.
Martin, thank you. It's 1:31, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Rafah crossing from Gaza has opened to allow foreign nationals and some injured civilians into Egypt. The first group has now crossed the border and the wounded are receiving treatment at a nearby field hospital. Up to 500 foreign passport holders are also expected to cross into Egypt. Local media says some have now arrived. James Cleverley says UK teams are ready to assist any British nationals. Meanwhile, aid trucks have entered into Gaza, with the Foreign Secretary warning they are vital to easing the humanitarian crisis there. The world needs a referee to mediate how companies use emerging technologies. That's according to Elon Musk. The tech entrepreneur is one of the high-profile guests at the world's first summit on AI safety at Bletchley Park. The Prime Minister hopes to put the UK at the centre of global efforts to monitor the technology, as well as attracting business investment. A declaration has been agreed by attendees of the summit, the starting point for a global conversation on AI safety. And a former top civil servant has suggested that hundreds of her colleagues may have breached lockdown rules, including government ministers. Helen McNamara was Deputy Cabinet Secretary in 2020 and 2021 and played a key role in Britain's COVID response. She told the inquiry that rules were routinely broken in the daily course of government and that Boris Johnson displayed a breezy confidence regarding the pandemic, which she found jarring. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
For a valuable legacy your family can own, gold coins will always shine bright. Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2115 and €1.1504. The price of gold is £1,639.28 per ounce, and the FTSE 100 sits 7,353 points.
Rosalind Gold proudly sponsors the GB News Financial Report.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth.
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to GB News Live with Ellie and Martin. Now, the first group of foreign passport holders have crossed into Egypt and evacuated Gaza. Hamas said it's important for the crossing to continue operations in both directions.
Well, the Foreign Secretary James cleverly posted on social media to say UK teams would be ready to help British nationals leave as soon as they are able to go. Well, let's speak now to Dr. Omar Abdul Manan, paediatric neurologist, who has called the situation in Gaza catastrophic. Very good afternoon to you, Doctor. What is your understanding of the situation in the hospitals in Gaza right now?
Good afternoon, Ellie and Martin. Thank you for having me on the programme. So I've been going to Gaza with a delegation of medics and surgeons since 2011, so 12 years now. We were actually due to go out there 2 weeks ago, not Sunday, but Sunday before. But obviously that got cancelled. We have been speaking to doctors and surgeons and healthcare professionals on the ground on a daily basis. These are friends, colleagues, students of ours. And what they have said, the picture they have painted is apocalyptic. It is a healthcare system that has collapsed. It is hospitals that have ran out of electricity, including Al Shifa Hospital, which is one of the largest trauma center in the north of Gaza, that is currently housing 70,000 people inside the hospital and on its grounds. That's 70,000 human beings sheltering there, in addition to it being at 500% bed capacity. They have ran out of fuel. That was the message that I got yesterday evening. And this morning when there was some communication before the phone lines got cut. What that means is babies, premature babies on the neonatal unit will not be able to be ventilated or have their breathing machines working. That means they will die. That means adult patients and children on the intensive care units who are also being ventilated will die. And that means patients who are having dialysis or key treatment for kidney failure and other chronic conditions will also die. We have seen almost 3,300 children killed so far by direct Israeli bombardment of residential civilian areas. That equates to one child every 15 minutes, actually closer to 1.9 when I've done the stats, but Save the Children quoted 1. And that is one child too many. This is unprecedented. This situation, this humanitarian catastrophe, this tsunami of human suffering is unprecedented. I am being sent personally photos, videos of children on my phone from Gaza, of children coming into the Al Shifa Hospital accident emergency with burns, 3rd-degree burns to their face. They're disfigured. their limbs are missing, their bowels are hanging out from their open abdomens. I'm sorry to be graphic, but your audience needs to hear this, because this is what's happening, because our politicians, because the Western government, because the Israeli government, and all sides have not called for an immediate ceasefire. And instead, they are warmongering. And that is what is continuing to happen.
Okay, Dr. Abdel Manan, we've been hearing for weeks now about hospitals running out of fuel, about generators being switched off, about hospitals running out of water. In fact, you just reiterated that yourself, and yet they still are open. How are they managing to function if, as you say, they have no fuel or water?
So this is a healthcare system that was on its knees, has been in siege and blockade since 2007 when Hamas took over. It has collapsed, and I can tell you that these are sources on the ground. These are figures and numbers from the Ministry of Health, from credible news organizations and credible people like the Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, who are telling us that there is no fuel entering. So I've also spoken to colleagues who have told me that the private supplies of medicines, antibiotics, basic supplies to run a hospital have been completely used up. So these hospitals are not functioning. That is what I'm trying to say. A third of these hospitals a week ago had made a statement saying, we cannot look after our patients. We are having patients die on our ward. We are having to triage patients at the front door. These doctors who I've worked with, and these surgeons and nurses and paramedics, are making horrendous decisions of having to choose who lives and who dies. And that is something, as a healthcare professional and as a medical body, we just cannot allow to continue, not on our watch.
And as a medical professional, a practical question, really, in terms of a lack of clean supplies, things like bandages, also a lack of oxygen, and as you were saying earlier, without generators, things like incubators can't work. What kind of level of care is actually taking place in these hospitals? What can doctors and nurses actually do? Because without clean supplies, it's basically like medical care in the medieval ages.
You've taken the word out of my mouth, Elise. So it is medieval medicine. That is exactly what it is. It's barbaric, and it's barbaric as a result of direct Israeli bombardments of residential civilian areas. So children are having their legs amputated with little to no anesthetic. Children with burns are being treated with water instead of morphine. And this is continuing to happen. The doctors and surgeons are reusing the same surgical gloves. They are having to make do with supplies. They are finding, intricate and clever ways of being able to look after their patients. But the reality is, a hospital does not run on air and determination. A hospital runs on basic supplies, on humanitarian aid coming in, on fuel for electricity. And the current climate is this is not possible. We see a trickle of ambulances going into the Gaza Strip now. And I've heard of numbers of 80 patients being looked after or being treated, complex patients. There are 20,000 civilians who have been injured, many of whom are extremely sick, extremely unwell, and need to be treated or triaged. So this is a drop in the ocean, just like it was a drop in the ocean with the humanitarian aid. This is a drop in the ocean with these ambulances coming in. And they won't be able to safely transport or transfer patients whilst there's Israeli bombing and shelling going on main roads.
Doctor, in terms of inhumanity, it's widely reported that Hamas used hospitals and also the tunnel networks underneath them, both to store and launch rocket attacks from them, and have command HQs underneath hospitals, using them and the patients inside as human shields. If that's so, will you join in the condemnation of such activity?
So the first thing to say is that I have personally, and our team of over 30 or 40 healthcare professionals from the Oxford Teaching Initiative, have traveled to Gaza on multiple occasions. And every time we have gone into one of these hospitals, including our Shifa European hospitals, Al-Quds, which was targeted or threatened with targeting, we have never heard or seen anything to that effect. What I cannot tell you, I agree, I cannot tell you whether there are tunnels or networks being used to launch rockets or to allow Hamas operatives to walk through. What I can tell you is that there are 70,000 refugees, people sitting in Al-Shifa hospital with an immediate evacuation order sent 48 hours ago by the Israeli government and the Israeli Defense Force. So they told them to evacuate, otherwise we will bomb the hospital. That was the direct threat. Look, I have colleagues of mine, friends of mine, who have family who are being held hostage by Hamas. So I wholeheartedly condemn anything, that leads to loss of human life. But what I'm saying is, what we are seeing is barbaric. What we are seeing is unnecessary. There needs to be an urgent push for an immediate ceasefire. And we are not seeing enough of that. We are not hearing enough people calling for that. In fact, we are hearing the opposite. And news organizations are not helping that narrative by continuing to use this narrative of Hamas operatives, of terrorism, etc. This is a hospital that we are talking about with patients and people. In no other conflict have I ever seen women and children not being evacuated, not being given the ability to leave, even in Ukraine, even in these barbaric situations. This is, the Israeli government has basically told these people to evacuate from their homes, 1 million people, and to go to the south to be bombed again and again. And it's continuing. Frankly, we've lost our humanity, and this is a stain on our collective conscience as a nation, as Western leaders and as Western people, to let this happen in 2023.
I mean, the Israeli government would say that they are trying to warn civilians of where there will be airstrikes so that they can move to safety, and they will say that their priority is getting rid of Hamas out of Gaza. So, Dr. Amar Abdel Manon, thank you very much.
Can I just respond to that? Apologies, but the UN Secretary General has come out, and a number of high-ranking officials have said that this does not excuse the targeting of civilian areas, which is what we are seeing. So I'm sorry, but that narrative is not good enough. That the ability to just let human life that is sacred on both sides, on every side, be destroyed is just not good enough. So I'm sorry to say, but this is still a humanitarian catastrophe that is in the making, and we are not doing enough to stop it.
OK, Dr. Omar Abdel Manan, a passionate response there. Thank you very much for joining us today on the show.
Now, it's not looking good for British businesses as insolvencies reach their highest levels since the 2009 financial crash. According to new data, over 18,000 companies have already gone bust this year, with firms battling with high interest rates and debt.
This comes as local government leaders warn that 1 in 10 county councils could now face bankruptcy, following on from Birmingham City Council's financial downfall earlier this year.
Well, joining us now is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. For businesses, isn't it, Liam?
This is the sharp end of the economy, Ellie. This is what happens when you raise interest rates 14 times in a row. And we've got another interest rate decision tomorrow, of course. Firms eventually go bust because firms have debts that they take on, and debt that firms take on is generally variable rate debt, so you pay more as interest rates go up, and firms just can't hack it. Interest rate rises mean consumers don't spend as much. We spend less money in the shops. Again, firms have less money coming in. Firms end up going bust. Have a look at these figures from the Insolvency Service. Between January and September 2023, we saw 18,367 insolvencies, and that's 13% up on the same period in 2022, January to September last year. This January to September figure this year is, as you said earlier, the highest since the 2009 financial crisis, in Lehman Brothers collapse, global financial crisis. And as I said, companies are suffering because borrowing costs are rising. Now, in addition to the actual insolvencies, we've also learnt that between July and September, on the next graphic, we have 37,722 companies in critical distress. That means the Insolvency Service knows that they haven't gone bust yet, but they are really struggling to meet the payments on their debts. And that distress factor, that's up a quarter on the previous 3 months this year. So you really see that higher interest rates are starting to squeeze the economy. And 11,000, roughly, of those 37,000-odd companies in distress are in the construction and the property sector, which is always what we say highly levered. There's always lots and lots of debt. You build a house, you spend lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of money, and then you get paid. So you have to take on debt to get over that bridge. And as I said, there is an interest rate decision from the Bank of England tomorrow at noon, and I would be really disappointed if the Bank of England was mad enough to raise rates again.
And it has to be said, Mystic Liam, you normally call these things right, so that you are on the money there. There is some other good news, though, in the figures today. House prices have risen only slightly, 0.9%. What's driving that?
That's great if you've got a house, right? But home ownership's very, very low these days. A lot of young people, a lot of parents with youngsters trying to get on the housing ladder, they don't want house prices to rise. They want a big, fat house price crash. So it's more likely that they can get a home that's affordable. What's driving it, I think, Martin, is this sense that interest rates probably have peaked now, so people might be brave enough to take on a mortgage in order to buy a house. House prices have been falling because mortgages have been too expensive, and so people have only been able to take on less debt, so they can offer less to buy the house. But look, we've had 14 interest rate rises. The Bank of England held interest rates last month. I do think they're going to hold interest rates at 5.25% tomorrow, and it may be that the narrative starts to go around that interest rates have now peaked. They're not going to go up anymore. We're going to have the Federal Reserve in America, the most important central bank. They're deciding interest rates tonight. If they hold, the Bank of England holds, then there may be a sense, OK, that's it. We've killed off inflation, or at least inflation is now going to start coming down really sharply. It's still over 6%. It should be around 2%. It may then be that confidence starts to return, because what's really pulverising, whether you're trying to get a mortgage or you're trying to run your company, the balance sheet of your company with lots of debt, what's pulverising is these endless drip, drip, drip rate rises, and you never know when it's going to stop. It's what spooks people and means they throw in the towel and, as we say in business, go bust.
OK, superb. Liam Halligan, superb stuff. Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, Liam. Now to the weather, as large parts of Newry in County Down, Northern Ireland, have been swamped by floodwater as the city's canal burst its banks amid heavy rainfall.
Yeah, dozens of businesses were engulfed in the floods, with widespread damage caused to buildings, stock and furnishings, with local police forces warning people to stay out of the city centre as streets have turned into rivers.
Well, let's speak now with GB News' Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie, who is braving the storm for us live from Newry. Very good afternoon to you, Dougie. And the situation is, isn't it, that the ground is already so saturated there. There is more rain coming, so the residents and the businesses in Newry, they're bracing themselves.
They are indeed, and we are dodging showers at this minute in time. Just as we're coming on the air, one is starting to, you can just feel it starting on you. But we're going to take you across the river that actually has done most of the damage. This is the Clonroy River, and if you look just over the top of it, you'll see the very Newry courthouse that's sitting there. And if we could just go in a little bit, you'll actually see the speed of the water that's coming down in there. And just to the left of the frame is the green pipes where they were frantically trying to pump the water out from beside this big church that is just sitting here. And if we just cross the river a little bit now, across a very shaky bridge, I must say, you can see just down to the right of me here Newry town itself, or Newry city should I say, just down there, and this is the Sugar Island area of Newry, known as Sugar Island because this was the port and the big quayside that most of the sugar was delivered in. It is the oldest canal in Britain, one of the oldest, and this river runs alongside that canal. Now, this isn't the canal beside it. In fact, this is part of the businesses of Newry, and you can see the big orange pump there in behind that was submerged, totally submerged in water. I'm not too sure that it was a good idea to leave a pump totally submerged in water on a level that it could be submerged, because of course it flooded out and it caused severe damage. Just over beside that stone building is a beautiful big Passat, and about 3 hours ago it was all but submerged in water. I mean, you can just see the windscreen wipers in the top of the windscreen. Somebody will have a few tales to tell about that. There's a car body and car garage over there that is also submerged. But really what you will see here is the mud that is in this car park, and in amongst that mud is nothing but raw sewage and all the manholes that blew up. and there is going to be a serious problem with that. Also, as well as that, you will see much of the water here is covered in diesel oil, and that will be a huge clean-up operation for later on.
OK, Doogie Beattie, thanks for joining us live from Newry. Please don't get swept away. We need you in the next hour.
Just want to bring you some live pictures now from Nairobi in Kenya, where Queen Camilla and King Charles are visiting an elephant orphanage there as part of their 4-day state visit to Kenya. They've been hearing about the orphanage's work. They've been shown a mud bath area in this orphanage, and she's even had a chance to bottle feed a baby elephant. We know they are very passionate about conservation. Wonderful pictures there coming out of Kenya. Do stay with us. We'll have more on Israel, Gaza and the conflict there with Mark White the next hour.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camila Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, you're watching GB News Live with Martin Daubney and me, Ellie Costello. Coming up for you this hour.
The first group of foreign passport holders have been evacuated from the Gaza Strip and have reached the Egyptian side of the Rafah border crossing, whilst the Israeli offensive intensifies. We'll have all the latest.
The highly anticipated Artificial Intelligence Summit commences at Bletchley Park today, aiming to highlight the opportunities and the dangers of artificial intelligence, with Elon Musk warning it could pose existential risk if it becomes anti-human.
And Storm Kieran's consequences as a danger to life warning is issued for parts of the UK. We're live across the country as gusts of wind are expected to reach a whopping 80 miles an hour.
And we can't get enough of these incredible live pictures of the King and the Queen with elephants in Nairobi. They are visiting an elephant orphanage right now. This is the Sheldrick Trust Elephant Orphanage in Nairobi. This is part of their state visit to Kenya. They've been hearing about the orphanage's work. The Queen has been shown to the mud bath area, and she's even had a chance to bottle feed a baby elephant, because we know this is something they feel really passionate about, isn't it, Martin? The conservation of animals. And what are they with now? Is that
That's a baby rhino.
Baby rhino.
It's a baby rhino, and of course, rhinos often are killed for their ivory too, for their horns. It's a terrible desecration of a wonderful natural resource. And of course, this is all about conservation and tourism, a more long-term view. Hopefully, the Queen won't take a mud bath herself. King Charles stubbed his toe earlier, almost took a tumble, but it was a great recovery. But wonderful pictures, and we'll make sure we keep coming back to them throughout the show.
And if you are listening on the radio, there's a lovely little baby rhino wrapped in a blanket here. The Queen has given him a little head rub and a scratch. The King just looking on at this moment in time. We'll come back to those pictures a little bit later on in the programme. But first, let's get the news headlines with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Ali. Good afternoon. It's 2 minutes past 2, your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The first group of injured evacuees from Gaza has arrived in Egypt. They were taken across the Rafah border crossing in ambulances under a deal mediated by Qatar. It's unclear how long the border will remain open, but it's unlikely all those waiting will make it through today. Meanwhile, aid trucks have entered Gaza, with the Foreign Secretary warning they are vital to easing the humanitarian crisis there. Well, it comes as the Israeli military says 9 of its soldiers have been killed during its ground offensive into Gaza. Israel's bombardment continues. The Israel Defense Forces says it's hit 11,000 Hamas targets so far. The IDF also claims an airstrike yesterday killed a senior Hamas commander it says was a ringleader of the attack on the 7th of October. Palestinian officials say 50 Gazans were killed and another 150 injured in that strike. Well, campaigners back here in London have projected the words "ceasefire now" onto the Houses of Parliament in the colours of the Palestinian flag. It was organised by Save the Children and other charities that say Rishi Sunak must put lives above politics and back calls for a ceasefire. They're handing a petition with over 300,000 signatures over to the government. In other news, the world needs a referee to mediate how companies use emerging technologies. That's according to Elon Musk. The tech entrepreneur's one of the high-profile guests at the world's first summit on AI safety at Bletchley Park. The Prime Minister hopes to put the UK at the centre of global efforts to monitor the technology, as well as attract business investment. A declaration has been agreed by attendees of the summit as the starting point for a global conversation on AI safety.
We're not stronger or faster than other creatures, but we are more intelligent. And here we are for the first time, really, in human history, with something that's going to be far more intelligent than us. So it's not clear to me we can actually control such a thing, but I think we can aspire to guide it in a direction that's beneficial to humanity. But I do think it's one of the existential risks that we face, and it's potentially the most pressing one.
A former top civil servant has suggested that hundreds of her colleagues may have breached lockdown rules, including government ministers. Helen McNamara was Deputy Cabinet Secretary in 2020 and 2021 and played a key role in Britain's COVID response. She told the inquiry that rules were routinely broken in the daily course of government And that Boris Johnson displayed a breezy confidence regarding the pandemic, which she found jarring.
It was striking that something that I felt personally was obviously deeply worrying, that there was a sort of de facto assumption that we were going to be great without any of the hesitancy or questioning or that sort of behind closed doors bit of government, which isn't about saying everything's smashing and going brilliantly, but actually being a bit more reflective. The sort of unbelievably bullish, we're going to be great at everything approach is not a smart mentality to have inside a government meeting.
House prices increased by 0.9% in October, which experts say reflects the limited supply of properties on the market. Nationwide's market index showed an increase on last month's figures, though average prices across the UK are down 3.3% compared to last year. The Building Society says market activity remains weak, with the number of mortgages approved in September down 30%. Amber weather warnings are in place for the south coast of England and parts of Pembrokeshire and Wales as Storm Ciarán nears the UK. The Met Office says wind and rain could bring potential risk to life and property. A red wind warning has been issued by Jersey Met, with gusts of almost 100 miles per hour expected. Parts of Northern Ireland have already been flooded due to heavy rainfall, and people have been warned not to travel. It comes less than 2 weeks after Storm Babette caused widespread damage across the UK. And the King and Queen are in Kenya on day 2 of their 4-day state visit. Their Majesties are celebrating animal welfare and environmental conservation with a visit to an elephant orphanage on the agenda for Queen Camilla, who can be seen in images which I'm sure Martin and Ellie will show you, of her feeding a hungry calf. The King visited an urban forest to highlight the importance of green spaces in our cities. You'll see more of that, no doubt, with Martin and Ellie. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car and digital radio, and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now, back over to Martin and Ellie.
Thanks, Rhiannon. You're watching GB News Live with myself and Martin. The time is 7 minutes past 2. Now, is now the time that global leaders will finally get a grip on AI. Vice President Camila Harris has just spoken at the AI summit and expressed the potential harms of AI. Let's take a listen.
It also has the potential to cause profound harm. From AI-enabled cyber attacks at a scale beyond anything we've seen before, to AI-formulated bioweapons that could endanger the lives of millions of people. These threats are often referred to as the existential threats of AI, because, of course, they could endanger the very existence of humanity.
Well, let's bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, who's at Bletchley Park for us now. And if you don't know Tom, he does love to talk about AI, so I can imagine he's absolutely delighted to be at this first AI summit in Bletchley Park. Look at him, he's absolutely buzzing to be there. Tom, let's start with Camila.
Ellie, I'm going to interrupt you here.
Yeah,
Ellie, I'm going to interrupt you here because I'm actually standing here with someone really rather important. Matt Clifford is the man who this whole summit. He's spent the last few hours chilling with Titans, Elon Musk and world leaders. And Matt, first of all, you're not a politician. You're not involved in the world of government. Why were you brought in to run this summit?
You're right. My day job, I run an investment company called Entrepreneur First. I came in to do a 10-week stint on this because I spent the last 10 years thinking about AI safety and thinking that while this technology has enormous upsides, if we don't nail the risk side, we won't adopt it. And so this was just an extraordinary opportunity to hopefully play a small part in getting us to that better future.
And what is that better future looking like? What would be a successful summit over the course of today and tomorrow? What are you actually looking to achieve here?
We're only a quarter of the way through, but I think it's already been a huge success. You know, if you think about what we said we wanted to do, which was really move the debate on, kick off a truly global conversation about that's already happened. I mean, the fact that this morning you saw Secretary of Commerce from the US and Minister of Technology from China on the stage together talking about AI governance, signing up to a communique that for the first time collaborate on it, I think that's already been a huge success.
A lot of people have been saying that contentious, but I suppose you'd view it as if it's sort of like bringing the Soviet Union into those nuclear disarmament talks.
I'm not sure I'd quite phrase it. You know, AI is a global issue. It doesn't stop at borders. You can't just say we want to have, you know, a conversation with our friends about this. It's absolutely crucial that if we're going to get global AI governance right, then we have a truly international conversation.
Of summits we learned this morning. One of the big announcements is
OK, isn't it amazing they're at a global AI summit and they can't get a reliable internet connection? Such is the life.
You can't make it up, can you? But Tom Harwood, as you saw there, practically jumping up and down to be at that AI Safety Summit. So we will come back to Tom Harwood, hopefully with some better reception a little bit later on in the programme. But let's talk about the King and Queen, shall we now? Because they've continued their 4-day state visit to Kenya today, which has been overshadowed, some would say, by calls for an apology for abuses committing during British colonial rule. This is the King's first state visit to the Commonwealth country as monarch, and King Charles said that he felt the greatest sorrow and the deepest regret for atrocities suffered by Kenyans during their struggle for independence.
But some are saying that this doesn't amount to a full apology. So let's speak now with our royal correspondent Cameron Walker. And Cameron, as well as some of the more austere stuff, we've seen some fabulous images today of the animal sanctuary, and it seems, and that wonderful image earlier of the King giving medals to a war veteran, 117 years old. Cameron, we have some live pictures here. Could you talk us through them?
Well, these are pictures of the Queen feeding an orphaned baby elephant, blocked photobombs by yet another elephant, who clearly is not camera shy. Yeah, it's an incredible conservation work which the King and Queen are both viewing in Kenya. It's part of the Nairobi Wildlife National Park, the Sheldrick Wildlife Trust and the Kenyan Wildlife Service, all about conservation and the preservation of wildlife and protected areas across Africa, because, of course, back in the day, numbers of elephants and rhinos in the big African five were, you know, decimated because of the poaching. And now there are huge efforts underway to make conservation the way to get on in life in terms of more money, and it's better, instead of poaching, to look after these animals for things such as tourism and for conservation efforts as well. And the King and Queen are very much shining a spotlight on this. We should have some lovely pictures as well of the King. We've just had of the King and Queen looking at a baby rhino as well, who is orphaned, only a couple of days old. And
before we were rudely interrupted there, Tom Hold at Bletchley Park, the King made a surprise appearance at that conference via video link, talking about, looking very tech-savvy, as we say, very impressive for a man of his age, talking about the importance of harnessing the good side of AI.
Yeah, he was. 100-odd world leaders, AI experts and tech industry bosses are at this summit. Downing Street was denying that some big world leaders, such as the US President Joe Biden, was snubbing the event. It's the government's view that they really want this to be Britain a leader, a world leader in terms of artificial intelligence safety. So I don't think it's much of a surprise that we've seen the British government's rolling out that, well, that's not the King, but I don't think it's much of a surprise that we've seen the British government rolling out the King to deliver a speech such as this, because the royals just have this charm offensive, don't they, and this global star power, which is really rare, which I suppose monarchists would say is a big benefit of the monarchy.
Yeah, and often when royals speak, the world listens. Let's talk about the emotional side of this trip for the King, because there have been moments, haven't there? There was a time when he read the diary of his late mother from when she was in Kenya.
Yeah, so during his speech at the State Banquet at the State House in Nairobi yesterday, the King spoke of a diary extract which he had read of his mother's from February 1952. Now, at that time, she was Princess Elizabeth. She was in Kenya as part of a visit to Commonwealth nations. She went up to Treetop Safari Lodge one evening. The following morning, she came down that ladder and she was queen because her father, George VI, had died in his sleep. And the King spoke of the Queen talking about the extraordinary landscapes of Kenya and that she didn't want to miss a moment of it. And he thanks the Kenyan people for supporting Queen Elizabeth II in the very early days of her reign, which would have been a very difficult time for her. So quite poignant poignant for the king to bring it up, that historical links.
And how interesting how this has come through the generations, this love of Africa, this love of animals, this love of conservation. You can see it in the late Queen Elizabeth. King Charles, we know, feels passionately about it. And, of course, Prince Harry now as well.
Yes, he certainly is. Yes, he is. We understand that Prince Harry is attempting to do a lot more work in Africa when it comes to conservation. Botswana has a huge place in his heart. He took Meghan Markle when she was still Meghan Markle and not the Duchess of Sussex on a 5-day tour of Botswana. So it is a continent which really has the royal family at its heart. And you mentioned conservation there. The King's father, Prince Philip, huge on conservation, and the King himself, more than 50 years, half a century, looking after animals, the climate, and as well as his son, Prince William, as well.
And there has been criticism, of course, of those historical wrongdoings in the 1950s. Yet you get a sense that the politicians, at least in Kenya, are happy to try and put that behind the two nations. And in fact, in 2013, didn't the British government pay something like £20 million in reparations, and didn't go a full apology as far as that, but they did express their sorrow. And do you think, Cameron, we can put that behind us now and move on?
Yes, so there was a High Court case back in 2013, and the British government did agree, as a result of that, to pay out nearly £20 million to around 5,000 elderly Kenyans who were abused by the British regime of the day. They didn't give a full apology, but what they did do was express sorrow and regret. And those words, I think, were echoed last night in the speech that the King gave at the State's banquet. He again expressed sorrow and regret. We did not get a full apology from the King. It's understood that the British government's stance is that a modern-day administration is not legally liable for something a government did 60 years ago. There's been some concern that if they did so, it would really open Pandora's box in terms of lawsuits. We just see the King and Queen here, if you're watching on television, at the Commonwealth War Graves this morning, and that is where the King presented a World War II veteran with a medal, a medal which he lost in the 1950s. He's 117 years old, and the King said he was amazing.
Absolutely incredible.
Here he is, yeah.
It really has been a packed schedule, hasn't it, Cameron? How do you feel as though the trip is going for the King and Queen?
I think it's a mix, but on the whole, OK, we've had the distraction from the calls for reparations, etc. But I think on the whole, we have seen a lot of really positive coverage in terms of the different engagements they're doing. It's been very carefully planned, this trip. It's on the advice of the British government that the King goes on these state visits. The British government really wants to shore up ties and relations between Kenya and the United Kingdom. It's an incredibly competitive market, that part of Africa. There's influence from China, Russia and America as well, all wanting part of those that trading pool, as it were. And the King yesterday was meeting young African entrepreneurs at a tech event. The Queen was meeting lots of young children, reading to them, literacy a huge passion of hers, and of course conservation today with the baby elephants.
And do you think, Cameron, it seems to be now a part of the landscape, just a part of the world we live in, that every foreign trip with the royals has this backdrop of historical wrongdoings, of reparations, of calls for apologies? It bothers a lot of people, it upsets a lot of people. Is that just now a part of the world we live in?
Unfortunately, I think whenever a royal will go to a Commonwealth nation, we're going to have this sort of trouble. You just have to see what happens with the visits of William and Catherine in 2022, pictures of them greeting children through a wired fence on top of an open-top Land Rover wearing colonial-style clothing. Really bad press for them on that event. With the King and Queen, they're really trying to shine a light on the engagements they're doing rather than harking back to the past 60-odd years ago. But I think it is going to be a huge challenge, particularly next year when we are expecting them to travel a little bit further, perhaps to Australia and New Zealand, although nothing's been confirmed by Buckingham Palace. And, of course, Australia and New Zealand, as other Commonwealth realms have been thinking of perhaps becoming republics at some point.
So there could be challenges ahead for the King and the Queen. Very good to see you, Cameron Walker. Thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on the royal visit to Kenya.
OK, now, after the break, we're live in Scampton as the High Court decides whether asylum seekers should be housed at the historic former RAF site. We'll see you shortly.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows, Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new
It's
teeth.
your new teeth.
I
I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Welcome back to GB News Live with myself and Ellie. Now, it's day 2 of a High Court hearing into government plans to house asylum seekers at former military airfields.
Yes, West Lindsey District Council argues a decision to use land at RAF Scampton, where the dam busters were based during World War II, is unlawful. Well, our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis, is in Scampton for us now. Good afternoon to you, Will. And the local council and residents that you were speaking to earlier, they feel passionately, don't they, using RAF Scampton as asylum accommodation is unlawful.
Yeah, it feels quite underwhelming to use a word like passionate. People have made this their lives for the last 7 months, ever since the Immigration Minister, Robert Jenrick, stood up in the House of Commons and said, we've got a problem, we're using too many hotels, £8 million a day right now, and the way that we're going to fix this problem is by putting 1,500 to 2,000 asylum seekers at RAF Wethersfield, which is in Essex, and, of course, RAF Scampton, which is the home of the dam busters. protesters. Now, as you said in the beginning, West Lindsey District Council and Braintree District Council are arguing that the reason that the Home Office is given for using these bases, these former air bases, in this way to house asylum seekers is unlawful. The thing that they're questioning is something called a class queue, which are essentially emergency measures that the government can employ when they say that they've got a problem, that they need to use Crown land, which this is here, these air bases, former air bases, Crown land, so they say that they can use it for a change of purpose. The argument from the councils is that is breaking planning restrictions because it's not actually an emergency. The migrant crisis, they're describing it as not being an emergency. So we're also hearing from the Home Office today. We're waiting to hear a little bit more from those High Court courtrooms to hear what the different lawyers have been saying when journalists that are inside of that London courtroom can offer a little bit of insight as to what's been happening. But then at the end of the day, because this is the end of the two-day judicial review, we're going to hear a lot from the council as they make statements, particularly people that are the directors of planning, people that manage planning restrictions inside of the areas, the local authorities around the councils. So we won't know that until a little bit later today. But what we do know is that people here outside of RAF Scampton, at least, are continuing their round-the-clock protest. Some of them sleeping here overnight. You can hear how noisy it is because of the cars that are passing, pipping their horns, showing support in all weathers. Right now it seems a little bit bright, but only a few moments ago it was torrential rain. And that is exactly what I'm talking about. The support from people along this part of Lincolnshire is unwavering. And the people that are here outside Scampton in the background waving their flags, they say that no matter what happens with the judicial review, they're not giving up on RAF Scampton.
Will, huge support in the background. We heard earlier from residents who feel they've been wrongly labelled by a lot of the media as, I don't know, somehow racist for having these reservations, but their reservations are entirely justified, aren't they?
Yes, well, they think so. They think if they're going to be raising a concern that the Home Office should be addressing it, whether it's reasonable or unreasonable, their fears are certainly real. And of course, that's the question whenever you've got something like this. What is it that is driving their worries, their fears? In this case, of course, about asylum seekers moving in. One of the reasons that people have given to me is that it is a fear of the unknown. Now, a lot of maybe refugee charities would defend asylum seekers, say that they're coming from war-torn countries. I think in this case it's mainly people from Iran, from Syria, from Iraq that are intended for Scampton at least. But as I say, whether it's reasonable or unreasonable, the people here have very real fears.
OK, Will Hollis there for us at RAF Scampton. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, and joining us live now from the High Court on day 2 of this case is GB News' Ray Addison. Ray, sentiments running very high. What's the latest in the High Court?
Well, Will was giving you a lot of the background detail there, so I won't go over that. But what we have been hearing today is from those KCs representing the government, the Home Office and the Department for Levelling Up. And they've been denying this claim that's been made that the Home Office knew all along that these two former military bases would be used for longer than 12 months. They say that's by no means definitive. The buildings that have been put into that facility at the moment are all temporary structures, and the plan is to take them out again in 12 months' time. And any future use past that 1 year would definitely be determined by the migrant crisis at the time, the number of people coming across the channel, and also the number of hotels available as well. Now, one man who's been supporting West Lindsey District Council's injunction against the use of our former RAF Scampton is Bruce Crompton. He'll be known to fans of military history as the presenter of Combat Dealers and also Amazing War Stories, and he joins us now. Thank you very much, Bruce, for coming in. Why are you here today?
I'm here to support, obviously, what's going on here. If I break it down into 3 elements,
First of all, obviously we're a civilised society and we've got asylum seekers, but this place is totally unsuitable to put asylum seekers in. First of all, it's in the middle of nowhere. The conditions they're going to be living in is totally unsuitable. And because of the fact it's an old RAF base, they're putting their health and safety at risk because of some potential contaminants there. Secondly, and the most important thing I think, is the fact I was involved with Horizon Parks. We put a multi-million-pound project together there, which would have brought so many people employment. It was a high-tech business park, heritage centre, Dam Busters Museum, Red Rose Museum, and it's just been cast aside. What about the local residents and bringing the economy to that area?
Sorry, Bruce, just to say, you're known for your love of military history, and of course it was the site of the Dam Busters, the home of the Dam Busters.
That's the third thing. I mean, I'm the flag waver now for keeping our military heritage alive. And again, at the stroke of a pen and with one nail in the coffin, we're losing one of the most historic bases from the Second World War, the historic 617 Dam Busters. You know, the 53 guys lost their lives there, on top of the people that flew out of the rest of the war. It's a heritage site of national importance. And at the stroke of a pen, it's gone. And it won't ever be reverted back to that. So for me, I'm passionate about it. I hope everybody will get behind, obviously, the campaign to stop this happening.
Well, you talk about the suitability, and you talk about the lack of development. Of course, the KCs for the government arguing this is just temporary, it's just going to be 12 months. And of course, they're saying it is Class Q, this is an emergency.
Absolutely, I don't accept any of it. There's plenty of other places that they could use. And as far as I'm concerned, it's Pinocchio talking. You know, they'll keep them there. And it's totally unsuitable. You know, they're miles from anywhere there. They're living in these pods. What are these poor people going to do? They'd be better off staying in France. I've got to be honest here, better conditions. The government could find much better accommodation for them and look after them much better than they're proposing by moving these people onto that historic heritage airfield. I'm very passionate about it.
Bruce Crompton, thank you very much for joining us. Do appreciate your time.
One more thing to say.
Go on.
GB News and Patrick, for what you've done for the Poppy Appeal, fantastic. Well done, GB News.
Thank you, Bruce.
Cheers.
Appreciate you. Well, just to summarise, obviously this was day 2 of that 2-day hearing. No result, no verdict expected today. We're being told that it's going to take at least 3 weeks.
Edison live from the High Court. Superb stuff, and Bruce Crompton channeling the Dam Buster spirit there. Fabulous.
Now, coming up, batten down the hatches as storms are coming. We'll have the latest on Storm Kieran, with a danger to life being issued in parts of the UK. That's after a news bulletin with Rhiannon.
Ellie, thank you. It's 2:32. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The first group of injured evacuees from Gaza has arrived in Egypt. They were taken across the Rafah border crossing in ambulances under a deal mediated by Qatar. It's unclear how long the border will remain open, but it's unlikely all those waiting will make it through today. Meanwhile, aid trucks have entered Gaza, with the Foreign Secretary warning they are vital to easing the humanitarian crisis there. The world needs a referee to mediate how companies use emerging technologies. That's according to Elon Musk. The tech entrepreneur is one of the high-profile guests at the world's first summit on AI safety at Bletchley Park. The Prime Minister hopes to put the UK at the centre of global efforts to monitor the technology, as well as attract business investment. A declaration has been agreed by attendees of the summit, the starting point for a global conversation on AI safety. And a former top civil servant has suggested that hundreds of her colleagues may have breached lockdown rules, including government ministers. Helen McNamara was Deputy Cabinet Secretary in 2020 and 2021 and played a key role in Britain's COVID response. She told the inquiry that rules were routinely broken in the daily course of government and that Boris Johnson displayed a breezy confidence regarding the pandemic, which she found jarring. And an amber weather warning amber weather warnings are in place for the south coast of England and parts of Pembrokeshire and Wales as Storm Ciara nears the UK. The Met Office says wind and rain could bring potential risk to life and property. A red wind warning has been issued by Jersey Met, with gusts of almost 100 miles per hour expected. Parts of Northern Ireland have already been flooded due to heavy rainfall, and people have been warned not to travel. And you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camila Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Good afternoon, you're watching GB News Live. Thank you so much for your company. You're joined by myself and Martin Daubney. Now, it's not looking good for British businesses as insolvencies reach their highest levels since the 2009 financial crash.
Yeah, according to new data, over 18,000 companies have already gone bust this year, with firms battling with higher interest rates and debt.
Well, joining us now is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. it, Liam, for businesses?
It is. This is what happens, Ellie, when you raise interest rates 14 times in a row, which we have since the end of 2001, all the way from 0.25% to now 5.25%. And there's another interest rate decision by the Bank of England tomorrow. But as those interest rates have risen, as borrowing costs have gone up, it isn't just people with mortgages and personal loans who've had to pay more. It's also businesses, and most business loans are variable rate. They're not fixed rate. And that squeezed businesses just when consumers, shoppers have had less money to spend, so businesses get less revenue in and they have to pay more for their debts, to service their debts, and that's how you get these ghastly insolvencies. So let's have a look at some of the numbers. And just remember, behind each of these insolvencies, there's often a family dream. There are human beings. There's a lot of human fallout here. Between January and September this year, we had 18,367 insolvencies across the country. That's 13% up on the same period in 2022. This year's January to September figure is, as you said, Ellie, the highest since 2009, in the aftermath, of course, of the collapse of Lehman Brothers, the global financial crisis. And as I said, companies are suffering because borrowing costs have been going up so sharply. And as well as actual insolvencies, there's another definition of a company's balance sheet. It's in critical distress. It's when the insolvency authorities can see a company is in distress. That's 37,700 odd, and that's up almost a quarter on the previous 3 months. 11,000 roughly of those distressed companies are in the construction and property sector. Construction, you spend a load of money and then you only get paid at the end, so you need debt to get across that bridge. And as I said, there is a Bank of England interest rate decision tomorrow at 12 noon, and storms allowing, I'll be outside the Bank of England reporting on that.
Super. And Mystic, Liam, you're predicting it to stay steady?
I do think we'll have interest rates held. I certainly hope so. I don't think there's any justification for raising rates anymore. The UK economy has stalled. We're on the brink of a recession. You're seeing these insolvencies coming through. You can see inflation being squeezed out of the system. So we held interest rates last month as well after 14 successive rises, and I think they'll hold them again at 5.25%. But a key indicator of what the Bank of England will do will come this evening when the mighty Federal Reserve, the US central bank, the most important, influential central bank in the world, I think they're probably going to hold rates. And if they hold rates, it gives the Bank of England perfect cover to do the same. So rates are going to stay high, but at least, hopefully, fingers and toes crossed, they're not going to go up anymore.
Good. And some positive news elsewhere. Well, at least if you're a homeowner, Liam, house prices up by 0.9%. What's driving that?
We've had successive months of house prices falling because mortgage costs are going up. So people can't afford to borrow as much. They can't bid as much on a house. So the offer prices go down. I think what's happening now, Martin, and a lot of youngsters won't like this, they want to see a house price crash so they've got more chance of buying a house. But I think what's happening now is people are reflecting on the kind of things I just said. It looks as if interest rates now have plateaued. They're not going to go up anymore. And that's why borrowers, people looking to buy homes, say, right, OK, we're really going to go for it now. We're going to try and get this house. We're going to borrow more because we can fix there. Hopefully interest rates won't go up anymore. So once interest rates peak and once people believe that they've peaked, you are going to see the housing market coming back. And I say that as a homeowner, that's great for me, for my kids, for Ellie's generation, with all respect, that isn't good news.
OK, Liam Halligan, thank you for that update with On the Money.
Thank you, Liam.
Super. OK, moving on now. The first group of foreign passport holders have crossed into Egypt and evacuated Gaza. Hamas has said it's important for the crossing to continue operations in both directions.
Well, the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly posted on social media to say that UK teams would be ready to help British nationals leave as soon as they are able to.
And GBNews security editor Mark White joins us now live from Tel Aviv. So, Mark, some positive news at last. 500 people passing through that crossing, including, we hear, maybe some Brits.
Well, we were told that perhaps a couple of British NGOs were on this list. Those the only ones so far. In fact, there are some reports of British nationals turning up at the Rafah crossing and realising they're not on the list, and so there's no chance that they're going to get through today. We're told that it was about 500 foreign nationals and dual nationals that are on that list to go through today. Those British nationals, the bulk of the 200 that the UK government have made contact with, will get out, we're told, but it may take a few days because clearly in opening this crossing it was a long time of negotiations with Egypt and Israel. They wanted to be sure that there was no security risks in opening that crossing, and from Egypt's point of view they don't want many thousands of people flooding over their border either, so it is a controlled release of people through that crossing in tandem with those people who are actually walking through themselves, those foreign nationals. There are ambulances that have gone in over the crossing to take a number of very seriously injured Palestinians over to hospitals in Egypt. A number of about 80 or so, we're told. The ambulances went in, they've been taking them back through the crossing throughout today. There's also a field hospital that's been set up in the desert just on the Egyptian side of the border as well to treat those that are being brought out with clearly very serious injuries.
And Mark, we also heard some concerning news overnight of the FBI. The FBI Director Christopher Wray saying the terror threat may be raised in America because of the ongoing conflict causing conflict domestically in America. Do you think, firstly, that's obviously very concerning. Is there any way that the ramifications could then spread to our shores here in Britain?
I think the ramifications have already spread throughout Europe. You're seeing, at the very least, protests, at times violent protests, and the possibility is, of course, that people will decide actually, because they've been triggered by the scenes they're seeing out of Gaza, to enact their feelings in a more violent way, and that is the real concern. We know that conflicts previously in terms of Iraq and Syria and also Afghanistan have triggered a significant number of terrorist incidents around the world, and that's why the FBI director said that the threat is clearly very high, the potential for terrorist attacks in the US. He said actually that the threat now really of the possibility of terrorist attacks is higher than it's been since ISIS came to prominence about a decade ago. So that gives you an indication of just what security agencies in the West are now trying to assimilate. They're clearly trying to keep an eye on those extremists they know about, but it's the ones, Martin, that they don't know about. Over the years, in recent years, with the advent of technology, more and more people have been radicalised very quickly indeed, just on their computer at home, watching images, listening to extremist messages, and then going out and acting that rage in a violent way.
OK, Mark White, live from Tel Aviv. Thanks for that latest update.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, we've got reports coming in that pro-Palestine vandals smashed windows of a Starbucks in West Yorkshire last night and released stick insects into that Starbucks cafe as well. That's after a spate of attacks on McDonald's in Birmingham, where mice were being released into McDonald's restaurants in Birmingham in the past 24 hours. Well, our reporter, Jack Carson, is in Birmingham for us now. And it looks as though, Jack, we were talking about copycat-style attacks earlier on with you, weren't we? It looks as though this is now spreading across the country, not just Birmingham now. This has also reportedly happened in Yorkshire.
Yeah, it does, and of course
this is also a level up, of course, from the protest that we've seen here at the McDonald's in Birmingham. Throwing mice is one thing, but of course the action that has happened in Keighley with that Starbucks, particularly smashing the windows, of course, it is then physical damage, of course, to that property. McDonald's, Starbucks and Disney are all part of this global boycott organised within the kind of community groups and social media groups of pro-Palestine protesters, organising them because of their positions on Israel. They see those companies as being pro-Israel, and so they are organising these boycotts at a community level and organising these protests at a community level. Of course, now it seems across the country. We've had very few in the last few minutes a tweet from Robbie Moore, the MP, who of course represents constituents in Keighley. He says he's sickened by the last night's acts of vandalism and intimidation which were carried out in his community. He says the smashing of windows at Keighley, Starbucks and McDonald's and the vile attempts to intimidate staff and customers were pathetic, cowardly and disgraceful acts. He says he's been in touch with the West Yorkshire Police late last night and again this morning, and also of course in touch with the West Yorkshire Mayor as well. He says these acts are completely counterproductive and an insult to all calling for peace in the Middle East. Now, the mice here that have been thrown in Birmingham, it's happened in 3 McDonald's now in Birmingham. McDonald's UK to come out saying they were sorry for the inconvenience, of course, that all of those attacks had caused, and that they had gone through a process of cleaning and sanitising the whole restaurants. Of course, there is an issue, of course, with the disease and of course all kinds of things that those mice could be carrying. Not least because they were not only being chucked in the restaurant, but particularly here in the video that we've seen from the incident here in Smallheath, the people with that box of mice who walked into the McDonald's here chucked the mice at the staff behind the counter. So there is, of course, an issue there with the mice who would have been around those food preparation areas, which is why the McDonald's had to be closed, of course, for that sanitising to be taken place. But of course, whether these attacks become something across the country, of course, Keighley is the start of what might well seem something like that. But we've also, of course, seen protests in Bristol, albeit not inside the McDonald's, as these pro-Palestine protesters, of course, come out against these companies which they see as pro-Israel.
OK, Jack Gosner, thank you for that update on a concerning and spreading phenomenon, protests against McDonald's and Starbucks for their stance on Israel.
Thank you very much, Jack. Now to the weather, as large parts of Newry in County Down, Northern Ireland, have been swamped by floodwater as the city's canal burst its banks amid heavy rainfall.
And dozens of businesses were engulfed in the floods, with widespread damage caused to buildings, stock and furnishings, with local police forces warning people to stay out of the city centre as streets have turned into rivers.
And we can see those streets that have turned into rivers now with our GB News reporter in Northern Ireland, Doogie Beattie, who joins us live from Newry. Good afternoon to you, Doogie. What's the situation on the ground?
Well, the situation on the ground is very clear. There's been 12,000 sandbags sent to the east of the province, waiting for this next part of this storm to arrive. Of course, the ground has been so sodden from the last few days' rain. You can see behind me here, the shops in this street have sandbags the whole way along them, and this is because of basically what's happening on this side here. If government ever wanted to have a problem brought to their door, this is the town hall that we're looking at, and it was built in the 1800s on a bridge, and underneath it you can just see the arches. The water is not even, you can't even see the arches on that bridge, and that's where it comes on down. Just if we walk this way, you can just see there's a wall that had to be broken down to let the water out of the streets of the city out to flow into this river. And then as we come along, you'll see just over this side of me here, there is another hole in the wall that was made by the river, not by man, and that goes into the canal on the other side of this river. Now, that has been punched through by the damage that was done here last night, and it is now flooding the other side of the canal, and they are pumping at the bottom end of Newry to try and make sure that the high street just down here to our right doesn't flood as well. There is now news that Kilkeel is flooded. Newcastle has been taking the strain, and Portadown, the River Bann, is also swollen, and the Rivers Agency is there trying to control that situation. But Newry sits in a valley and all the water washes down in here. Now you can see that this river is still dangerously high, and there has been showers throughout the day, but they're more worried about what's coming down as it travels down from Portadown.
And Doogie, how are businesses feeling? How are residents feeling that you have spoken to? As you say, the ground is already so saturated, more rain to come tonight. There must be such a sense of nervousness and fear for people who are worried about their homes and their businesses.
Well, we spoke to one business owner yesterday, and I've spoke to a couple today who don't want to appear on camera because they are so upset by what has happened to their businesses. Many of them here don't have insurance because this is in a flood area. I mean, one man I spoke to had just had his premises totally done up, and quite literally 3 weeks ago, people were only coming back to work after working at home, and he is now worried how he's going to pay those bills. Another car mechanic out the other side, he has 4 cars belonging to customers inside the garage, and he's telling me there's over 3 foot of water still inside, and they are not allowed in there yet because DFI won't let them in because of insurance purposes until that water levels have dropped. So there's a lot of anxious businesses here in Newry. Really and truly, the housing side of Newry is very much on the other side of this river, and so not many houses were hitting this. This mainly affected businesses, although in Kilkeel we are hearing that there has been some flooding in amongst residential properties.
Doogie Beattie, thanks for that update live from a very rain-sodden and soaked Newry in Northern. Don't get swept away though, Doogie, and we need you in the next hour with Patrick Christys.
I mean, the speed of that water behind Doogie is absolutely terrifying, isn't it? You can just see the speed at which it's going through that city centre, and of course more rain to come, and already the river is so high you can't even see the arches on bridgeways.
So we need to keep a close eye on where it's heading. Heading over to the mainland next. I think the southwest and the south are going to get a battering tomorrow. It looks as though the picture is going to be bleak, but that won't affect you, Ellie. You're off on holiday. You're going to Thailand.
I am off on holiday if my plane can actually take off, because that's the other issue with this amber warning. Could cause chaos with our travel systems as well. So do be careful if you're in coastal areas as well. That's it from us today. Patrick Christys is up next.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually